For centuries, the Vatican has stood as a silent guardian of knowledge, its walls echoing with whispers of forgotten truths and lost histories. Within its labyrinthine archives lie manuscripts that few have seen, their pages fragile, their secrets profound. Some date back millennia, predating empires, civilizations, and even the earliest chronicles of our known world. Among these treasures are texts that defy explanation, cryptic codices, ancient prophecies, and treatises on subjects that challenge our understanding of science, history, and human civilization itself. Scholars and historians have puzzled over them for generations, uncovering fragments that hint at knowledge suppressed, altered, or deliberately hidden from the eyes of the public. Marginal notes, coded symbols, and obscure diagrams suggest layers of meaning we are only beginning to glimpse. What truths did these manuscripts preserve? What stories of vanished civilizations, pre-flood knowledge, or mysterious technologies might they contain? As we begin this journey through the 24 most mysterious documents hidden in the Vatican that scientists and historians still cannot explain, we step into a world where history and mystery intertwine, and where every page could rewrite what we think we know about the past. Chapter 1. Codex Vaticanus. The Codex Vaticanus rests in the silent heart of the Vatican Library, its presence both imposing and delicate, a relic that has survived the passage of 16 centuries. Its pages, fragile and faintly yellowed with age, seem to breathe with the weight of time itself. This manuscript, written on fine vellum with meticulous Greek script, is widely recognized as one of the oldest extant copies of the Bible, yet its significance extends far beyond its age or its place within religious scholarship. The Codex Vaticanus is a vessel of mysteries, a repository of textual choices that challenge the narratives we often take for granted. Each letter, each careful stroke of ink, carries traces of decisions made long before the modern world, decisions that shaped the very way human memory would understand the divine. Scholars examining the Codex have noted textual variants, omissions, additions, and rearrangements that differ from later canonical texts. In some cases, entire passages familiar to modern readers are absent, replaced perhaps by marginal notes, subtle annotations, or deliberate erasures. Paleographers have suggested that these changes may not be accidental. They might reflect an alternative historical memory, a record preserved in secrecy. The origins of the manuscript are themselves shrouded in uncertainty. While most agree it dates to the 4th century CE, the precise circumstances of its creation remain debated. Was it copied in Egypt, where some of the earliest Christian communities flourished? Or does it preserve fragments of an even older tradition, texts that predate the formal canon, carrying echoes of ideas that the Church would later deem too dangerous or divergent? The Codex survival is remarkable. Centuries of upheaval, plagues, wars, fires, political upheaval, swept across Europe and the Mediterranean, yet the manuscript endured. It was transported, safeguarded, and catalogued, always under the watchful eyes of custodians who understood its value. Its very existence is a testament to a deliberate choice, to preserve in secrecy knowledge that might have been suppressed, obscured, or misunderstood. The vellum bears the faint imprint of countless hands, some tracing letters in reverent study, others in hurried transcription, suggesting the Codex was not merely stored, but engaged with, scrutinized, and perhaps interrogated over generations. Every imperfection, every ink blot or erasure, whispers a story of human interaction with the sacred and the forbidden. The physical attributes of the Codex Vaticanus are themselves a subject of fascination. The text is written in a careful, continuous script known as uncial, yet the spacing, the rhythm, the very flow of letters suggest a purpose beyond mere transcription. Some scholars have noted unusual patterns in the ink, subtle variations that could indicate multiple scribes or perhaps an intentional encoding of information. Marginalia appear sporadically, cryptic and fragmented, like fleeting glimpses of ideas not fully revealed. The pages, arranged in quire after quire, form a silent lattice of knowledge that seems to resist complete understanding. There is a rhythm to the manuscript that transcends its words, a cadence that draws the reader into a reflection not only on what is written, but on what might have been deliberately withheld. Historical context deepens the intrigue. In the 4th century, Christianity was undergoing profound transformation. Councils convened to establish orthodoxy, texts were evaluated for inclusion in the canon, and dissenting writings were often suppressed. The Codex Vaticanus occupies a liminal space in this process, straddling what was accepted and what was marginalized. Some pages appear to preserve traditions closer to early Christian or even pre-Christian thought, fragmentary threads that did not survive elsewhere. The manuscript, therefore, is not merely a religious artifact. It is a mirror of intellectual and spiritual struggle, a silent witness to the shaping of belief systems and collective memory. Each textual variant, each omitted passage, raises questions about the forces that determined which ideas endured and which were cast into obscurity. Scholars continue to probe its secrets with painstaking care. Every letter is measured, every gap examined for signs of erasure or redaction. The Codex Vaticanus is more than a historical document. It is a dialogue across time, a conversation between scribes, theologians, and custodians whose intentions remain partly veiled. The manuscript challenges assumptions about textual authority, inviting questions about the reliability of history itself. Could the omissions conceal knowledge of early theological debates, alternative cosmologies, or even pre-Christian traditions? The possibility lingers, subtle yet persistent, that the Codex contains coded insights, patterns of thought deliberately veiled to preserve them through centuries of scrutiny and censorship. Beyond its textual significance, the Codex Vaticanus embodies the tension between visibility and concealment. The Vatican Library, with its immense corridors and shadowed galleries, functions as both sanctuary and vault, shielding its treasures from unmediated view. The Codex exists in this interstitial space, accessible to a select few, its pages rarely exposed to light, as if the manuscript itself requires careful, reverent engagement to reveal even a fraction of its truths. The contrast between what is written and what is missing, between the visible text and the latent meanings hinted at in marginalia, creates a layered experience for the researcher, a landscape of knowledge partially charted, partially obscured, inviting conjecture and reflection. Modern technology has begun to reveal additional layers of mystery. Multispectral imaging, chemical analysis of inks, and digital reconstruction of damaged sections have unveiled details invisible to the naked eye. Faint impressions of erased letters and notes suggest deliberate alterations, perhaps centuries before modern scholars first encountered the manuscript. Each discovery deepens the questions. Why were these changes made and by whom? Were they the result of doctrinal oversight, the work of scribes attempting to reconcile divergent traditions, or a conscious effort to preserve hidden wisdom? In these faint traces, the Codex speaks in a language of absence as much as presence, inviting interpretation, yet withholding certainty. The Codex Vaticanus is not static. It participates in a continuum of history, its significance evolving as it is studied, debated, and interpreted anew. Its pages hold the fingerprints of time, the residue of human devotion, and the imprint of intellectual rigor. It is a document of contradictions, ancient yet preserved, canonical yet variant, visible yet secretive. For those who approach it with care, it offers not only glimpses into early Christianity, but a profound meditation on the fragility and resilience of knowledge. The manuscript challenges the assumption that history is linear, suggesting instead that human memory is layered, selective, and often deliberately curated. As we consider the Codex Vaticanus, its silence speaks more loudly than words. It does not offer easy answers, nor does it invite hasty conclusions. Instead, it lingers in the mind, a spectral presence that calls for patience, reflection, and a recognition of the vast, often hidden currents of history. Its textual anomalies, cryptic marginalia, and remarkable survival remind us that much of our understanding of the past rests not only on what is preserved, but on what has been altered, erased, or hidden. And in this quiet, the Codex challenges us to reconsider the narratives we take for granted, to imagine histories that might have been lost, and to remain attentive to the subtle, haunting presences that linger in the manuscripts of the world's most guarded library. Chapter 2, Codex Vaticanus. 3738, Astronomical Treatises. Within the shadowed chambers of the Vatican Library, behind doors and corridors few have passed, lies Codex Vaticanus 3738. Its presence is subtle, almost unassuming, yet the manuscript radiates a quiet gravity, as if it knows the weight of the knowledge it preserves. Unlike the more familiar biblical codices, this volume is filled not with scripture, but with charts, diagrams, and texts whose meaning has eluded scholars for centuries. At first glance, the pages resemble early astronomical charts, delicate constellations etched in ink, planetary orbits traced with precision, and intricate cycles that hint at an understanding of the heavens far beyond what we typically attribute to the period. Yet the Codex's dating, predating much of medieval European astronomy, suggests these were not the product of Renaissance rediscovery or scholastic experimentation. They are older, far older, and their origins remain enshrouded in mystery. The charts themselves are mesmerizing. Constellations, some familiar, others unrecognizable, float across the vellum as though the night sky had been captured and preserved in ink. Lines connect stars in patterns that do not correspond to traditional Greek or Roman depictions, yet they maintain an uncanny coherence. Planetary alignments are recorded with an accuracy that modern historians find astonishing, sometimes corresponding to celestial events that would only have been recognized centuries later. Marginal annotations, written in a compact, deliberate hand, suggest attempts at calculation, correction, or perhaps cryptic encoding. The complexity of these markings has led some scholars to propose that the manuscript is not merely astronomical in intent, but cosmological, mapping cycles of time, motion, and possibly even hidden knowledge that ancient civilizations might have deemed dangerous to share openly. The origins of Codex 3738 are elusive, partially obscured by time and by the deliberate secrecy that seems to have accompanied its preservation. Some researchers point to Egyptian or Mesopotamian influences, noting similarities in symbolic representation and astronomical measurement with tablets and star charts from these cultures. Yet no direct lineage has been definitively established. Could these pages be copies of even older texts, fragments of civilizations whose astronomical wisdom far exceeded our current understanding? The very materials, the vellum, the inks, the meticulous ruling of lines, suggest a manuscript of great importance, treated with care, repeatedly revised and corrected. Forensic analysis reveals layers of ink and subtle alterations, as if successive custodians had adjusted, refined, or concealed details, perhaps to obscure meaning from all but the most knowledgeable. What is striking is the apparent sophistication of the astronomical concepts. There are indications of precession cycles, the gradual shift in the orientation of the Earth's axis, a phenomenon not formally described in European scholarship until millennia later. Certain diagrams suggest long-term tracking of planetary motion and lunar phases, implying a culture capable of careful, sustained observation. Some planetary positions in the charts align with dates far earlier than the Codex's estimated creation, suggesting either extraordinary historical memory or the transmission of older records. In this light, the manuscript becomes not only a record of observation, but a potential bridge to a forgotten understanding of celestial mechanics, knowledge that may have been suppressed or overlooked, waiting for centuries to re-emerge in obscurity. The Codex also raises questions about the intersection of science and spirituality in antiquity. Many of the diagrams are accompanied by enigmatic symbols and inscriptions that resist straightforward interpretation. Some appear to encode numerical values, ratios, or proportions, perhaps suggesting cosmological significance, ritual timing, or esoteric meaning. Others hint at philosophical reflection, linking the motions of stars and planets to human destiny, cycles of civilization, or pre-flood myths preserved across cultures. It is a manuscript that inhabits the space between observation and speculation, fact and symbolic meaning. Its very survival suggests that those who preserved it understood both its potential power and the dangers of misinterpretation. The history of the Codex custodianship adds further layers to its enigma. It has remained largely inaccessible, carefully stored and selectively studied, as though the Vatican recognized its unique and possibly subversive value. There are records of scholars who glimpsed portions of the text, attempting to reconcile its content with known astronomical knowledge, only to encounter puzzles that resist conventional explanation. Each page appears carefully curated, yet inconsistencies, corrections, and marginal marks indicate an evolving narrative of understanding, or perhaps deliberate obfuscation. Were these alterations made to protect the knowledge from misuse, or to conceal truths considered heretical by contemporary authorities? The manuscript's subtle complexity suggests the answer is neither simple nor complete. Codex 3738 is not static. It seems to breathe with the curiosity and intent of generations. Some pages appear as if they were consulted and annotated repeatedly, the handwriting of different periods discernible under close examination. These layers of intervention imply a dialogue across centuries between those who recorded the heavens and those who sought to preserve or reinterpret them. It is a manuscript that challenges linear history, inviting contemplation of a continuum of knowledge where ancient civilizations, lost techniques, and pre-flood cosmologies may intersect. Each diagram is a doorway to speculation, every correction a whisper from a hand long vanished, guiding modern observers to question the limits of historical understanding. The Codex also hints at connections between disparate regions and traditions. Certain constellations depicted bear resemblance to figures from Babylonian star charts, while other symbols evoke Egyptian cosmology. This confluence raises questions about the transmission of knowledge across cultures in antiquity, and the possibility that some wisdom, astronomical, mathematical, or philosophical, was deliberately preserved and transmitted in secrecy. If so, Codex 3738 is more than an astronomical treatise. It is a testament to humanity's effort to safeguard knowledge that might otherwise have been lost in the upheavals of time, conquest, and cultural transformation. What makes this manuscript particularly compelling is its quiet insistence on ambiguity. It does not provide clear instructions or explanations. It offers charts, alignments, and annotations that are simultaneously precise and cryptic. Scholars can measure angles, trace planetary paths, and identify celestial cycles. Yet the intent behind these markings remains elusive. Were they intended to guide ritual, predict events, or encode a deeper cosmology? The answers, if they exist, remain hidden, layered beneath centuries of use, observation, and revision. Each examination raises further questions, inviting reflection on the boundaries between observed reality and the interpretive imagination of those who recorded it. As one contemplates Codex Vaticanus 3738, there is a sense of intimacy with the past. The vellum, the inks, and the lines etched by human hands connect the observer to individuals who gazed at the same night sky, who sought to measure its patterns, and who perhaps understood dimensions of the heavens we have yet to fully grasp. Its charts are more than representations. They are traces of perception, of intellectual and spiritual engagement, and of the human desire to map the cosmos, to find order in the vast, unfolding tapestry of the universe. The manuscript asks us not for answers, but for attention, patience, and humility in the face of knowledge that is at once precise and ineffably distant. Codex 3738 remains largely inaccessible to the public, and much of its content is still being analysed through cautious scholarly study. Each layer of ink, each subtle variation in diagram or alignment, offers tantalising evidence of a worldview that may differ profoundly from our modern assumptions. It is a record that connects mathematics and observation with myth and memory, bridging the tangible and the symbolic. It invites the observer to consider that civilizations long before us may have achieved an understanding of the cosmos that modern science is only beginning to glimpse, and that the preservation of such knowledge was never accidental, but deliberate, reverent, and perhaps protective of truths deemed too dangerous for the uninitiated. In the quiet halls of the Vatican Library, the Codex rests, its pages poised between revelation and secrecy. It neither asserts nor denies, it simply exists, a conduit of ancient insight, a witness to the care, contemplation, and perhaps fear that guided its creation and preservation. For those who linger with it, who trace its lines and contemplate its symbols, the manuscript becomes an invitation to imagine, to question, and to recognize that the story of human understanding is far more layered, complex, and mysterious than any single civilization or era could fully capture. It is a text that reminds us that the heavens have always been observed, measured, and pondered by those who came before, and that some knowledge, though hidden, endures patiently, awaiting recognition across the centuries. Chapter 3, Codex Rossanensis, in the quiet. Temperature-controlled vaults of the Vatican Library and in select repositories across Italy, the Codex Rossanensis rests, an object of subtle luminosity and enduring mystery. This 6th century illuminated gospel is not merely a text, it is a work of devotion, craftsmanship, and hidden intention, a bridge between the material and the mystical. Its vellum pages, soft and supple after centuries, are painted with pigments that retain a vibrancy that challenges our understanding of medieval chemistry. reds that seem to glow from within, blues that remain impossibly deep despite the passage of 15 centuries, gold leaf that has not dulled but catches light with the quiet radiance of a candle. These elements speak to artisans whose knowledge of materials may have been lost or intentionally guarded. Every page is an invitation to slow observation, to a contemplation that stretches beyond the narrative words themselves and into the realm of symbols, colours, and celestial design. The illustrations are perhaps the most striking aspect of the Codex, for they extend beyond conventional Christian iconography. Angels are rendered with unusual features, sometimes sporting intricate geometric patterns, other times depicted as guardians of luminous spheres or cosmic maps that suggest not only spiritual, but astronomical and metaphysical significance. These figures do not merely accompany the gospel text. They inhabit a parallel visual language, one that may encode cosmological, mystical, or even philosophical knowledge. Some scholars speculate that the Codex represents a continuity of esoteric tradition, a thread of spiritual insight preserved outside mainstream doctrine, carefully guarded in monastic or ecclesiastical custodianship. Each page is a palimpsest of meaning, a complex interplay between narrative, symbol, and color. The pigments themselves remain a point of fascination. Scientific analysis has revealed that some are made from rare minerals and organic compounds, some sourced from distant regions, suggesting trade networks or knowledge of materials that exceeded the apparent technological capacities of their time. Certain ultramarine blues, derived from lapis lazuli, are layered with precision, creating depth that seems to shift as the viewer's perspective changes. Red pigments, from cinnabar or possibly ancient cochineal sources, retain a luminosity that defies the natural fading one might expect. The careful layering and blending hint at not only artistic mastery, but also a deliberate encoding of symbolic resonance, a chromatic language understood by those trained to read it. What knowledge guided these choices? And what messages might have been intended for eyes trained to perceive subtler truths than those of casual observers? Beyond the pigments, the compositions themselves are enigmatic. Celestial maps, arcs of stars, and spiral motifs recur throughout the Codex, suggesting a knowledge of the heavens intertwined with spiritual narrative. Angels and symbolic figures sometimes align with these maps, as if serving as guides or markers, pointing toward constellations, lunar cycles, or cycles of time otherwise undocumented. Marginal diagrams, often geometric and abstract, hint at a symbolic cosmology that scholars have struggled to interpret. Were these guides for meditation, teaching, or encoding knowledge too advanced, or perhaps too dangerous for ordinary comprehension? The deliberate abstraction and layering of meaning create a tension between what is visible and what is hidden, challenging any observer to consider not only the text itself, but the context in which it was created and preserved. The Codex's history is itself a tapestry of movement and protection. While partly housed under Vatican custody, it has long been associated with the city of Rossano in southern Italy, and evidence suggests that it was carefully guarded through periods of upheaval, invasions, and ecclesiastical reform. Its survival in such pristine condition speaks not only to the quality of its materials, but to the vigilance of its custodians. Each restoration and handling, meticulously documented, suggests reverence, but also the possibility of selective preservation. Choices about what to protect, what to highlight, and perhaps what to obscure. In this way, the Codex becomes more than a gospel. It is a record of human intention across centuries, a dialogue between artisans, scribes, and guardians who understood both its beauty and its potential power. Scholars who have examined the illustrations note a striking combination of precision and abstraction. Figures are often rendered with proportions and gestures that suggest symbolic rather than literal meaning, and recurring motifs, interlaced circles, spirals, and rays, echo cosmological patterns observed in other ancient traditions, from Mesopotamian star charts to early Egyptian iconography. Could these images be more than artistic embellishments? Some researchers propose that the Codex preserves encoded knowledge of mystical cosmologies, insights into the relationship between the heavens and human consciousness, or even a lost understanding of sacred geometry. The possibility lingers that the Codex Rossanensis functions simultaneously as scripture, meditative guide, and celestial map, a layered record of knowledge deliberately kept apart from conventional textual transmission. The interplay between text and illustration deepens the sense of mystery. While the gospel text is written in Greek, Flowing with the clarity and rhythm of liturgical transcription, it is the juxtaposition with visual elements that creates an almost hypnotic effect. Readers are drawn into a dialogue that is both intellectual and contemplative, a slow engagement with narrative, symbol, and color that allows hidden patterns to emerge gradually. Certain illuminations seem to correspond to specific passages, while others appear independent, existing solely as symbolic constructs or mnemonic devices. The Codex thus demands attention not merely to the words, but to the spaces between them, to the gestures of the figures, to the rhythm of lines and arcs, and to the resonance of color, a multi-dimensional experience rarely encountered in surviving medieval manuscripts. The choice of symbols and figures raises profound questions. Angels often appear as intermediaries between earthly and celestial domains, yet their forms sometimes defy conventional theological interpretation. They may bear attributes that align with ancient cosmologies, depicting spheres, arcs, or grids reminiscent of mathematical or astronomical diagrams. Some geometric patterns repeat across multiple pages, suggesting knowledge of cycles, proportions, or ratios that may reflect pre-Christian or cross-cultural insight. These repeated forms hint at intentional transmission, an artisan or scribe conveying knowledge that could only be understood by those trained in its symbolic language. The Codex, in this sense, functions not merely as a religious text, but as a repository of hidden systems of thought, preserved through color, line, and form. There is also evidence that the Codex served a liturgical or meditative function. The positioning of figures, the rhythm of text and image, and the visual hierarchy of pages suggest intentional design for contemplation or ritual engagement. Yet unlike many illuminated Gospels, the Codex Rossanensis does not strictly conform to canonical narrative expectations. Instead, it introduces cosmological elements, symbolic figures, and patterns that do not appear elsewhere in mainstream scripture. This deviation invites speculation. Was the Codex intended for a select audience, trained in the interpretation of symbols? Was it a spiritual manual, a cosmological treatise, or a subtle vehicle for transmitting knowledge that was otherwise forbidden or marginalized? The questions remain open, as do the possibilities for interpretation. The Codex's preservation of pigments, materials, and symbolic structures also underscores the level of technological knowledge possessed by its creators. Certain mineral and organic pigments would have required access to distant trade networks, meticulous processing, and precise application to ensure longevity. The layered textures and subtle color gradations indicate not only artistic skill, but also sophisticated chemical understanding. These technical achievements, combined with the manuscript's symbolic complexity, point to a convergence of science, artistry, and spirituality rarely witnessed in surviving works of the period. The Codex Rossanensis is, in this sense, a testament to a civilization of thought in which knowledge of material, symbolic, and celestial realms were inseparable. As one moves through the pages, there is a sense of deliberate pacing, a rhythm that mirrors the slow unfolding of time and knowledge. Each illustration and annotation is positioned to engage the observer gradually, allowing patterns and relationships to emerge without haste. The manuscript invites reflection, drawing the viewer into a meditative state where the visual and textual elements intertwine, and where the boundaries between the observed world and symbolic insight dissolve. In this interplay, the Codex becomes not only a repository of scripture, but a map of thought, a meditation on the cosmos, and a silent record of artisans and thinkers who sought to preserve understanding through centuries of change. Chapter 4. The Vatican Palimpsests. In the dimly lit chambers of the Vatican Library, where shelves stretch endlessly into shadow, there exists a collection of manuscripts that defy ordinary comprehension. Known collectively as the Vatican Palimpsests, these layered documents carry within them centuries of human thought, observation, and deliberate concealment. Each palimpsest is a manuscript reborn, a witness to the passage of time, its original text scraped or washed away, only to be overwritten with new writing. Yet beneath the visible words lie traces of earlier civilizations, fragments of knowledge that the centuries have not fully silenced. To hold such a manuscript is to touch a threshold between eras, a delicate intersection where one voice may whisper beneath another, and where forgotten histories press faintly against the present. The very process of creating a palimpsest speaks to both scarcity and intent. In a world where parchment was precious, scribes often erased older texts to provide material for new work. But not every erasure was economical. Some were deliberate, a conscious effort to suppress, obscure, or redirect the flow of knowledge. In the Vatican's collection, modern imaging techniques, multispectral photography, ultraviolet fluorescence, and infrared scanning have revealed layers of writing that cannot be perceived with the naked eye. Beneath the familiar ecclesiastical scripts emerge patterns of symbols, tables, and glyphs that appear to belong to languages unknown or otherwise unattested. Some fragments suggest mathematical tables of unusual sophistication, sequences that hint at knowledge of astronomy, geometry, or systems of computation that remain difficult to interpret even today. Each palimpsest becomes, in essence, a hidden dialogue between eras, between scribes and thinkers, and between those who sought to preserve knowledge and those who sought to obscure it. Among the most enigmatic discoveries are traces of texts that resemble lost gospels or apocryphal accounts. In some cases, the underlying writing presents alternate narratives, stories of figures and events absent from canonical scripture, or variations of well-known episodes that suggest a broader, more complex spiritual landscape than traditional accounts allow. Elsewhere, fragments of ritual instruction appear, evoking ceremonies, chants, or mystical practices that may have once been widespread but were later marginalized or condemned. In rare instances, evidence has emerged of manuscripts that could predate even these early Christian texts, accounts that some have tentatively linked to pre-flood or antediluvian traditions, although the precise interpretation remains elusive. The act of overwriting transforms these documents into historical palimpsests, not only materially but conceptually. Each new layer is a testament to decisions about which knowledge was to survive, which was to be buried, and which was considered dangerous to memory. The palimpsests also reveal the subtle craft of the scribe, whose interventions were not always blunt. Erasure was often meticulous, removing visible traces while leaving faint impressions detectable only with careful scrutiny. The overwritten texts sometimes align precisely with new writing, creating a layered rhythm, a ghostly interplay between old and new. Marginal annotations occasionally persist, suggesting that the original text was understood, commented upon, or referenced, even as it was replaced. In these delicate traces, the palimpsests reveal themselves as repositories not just of information, but of intention, records in which the choices of past custodians continue to speak, faintly but insistently, across centuries. Some palimpsests contain diagrams that defy immediate categorization. Esoteric figures, geometric shapes interlaced with symbolic markings, have been interpreted as celestial maps, ritual schematics, or even coded philosophical treatises. These diagrams often appear alongside faint inscriptions that resist translation, letters distorted or partially effaced, yet arranged in patterns suggesting logic or design. Certain sequences evoke mnemonic devices, teaching aids, or systems of knowledge intended to survive in hidden form. Scholars have debated whether these diagrams were meant as instruction for initiates, as meditative tools, or as an encoded safeguard against the destruction of knowledge considered subversive. The result is a multi-layered archive where meaning is both present and concealed, where understanding demands patience and a willingness to embrace uncertainty. The act of palimpsest making in the Vatican tradition is entwined with both preservation and power. Throughout the Middle Ages, the Church confronted texts it deemed heretical, dangerous, or discordant with emerging orthodoxy. Some erasures were motivated by theology, others by institutional control, and still others by practical necessity. Yet in every case, the layers of writing tell us something essential. Knowledge is rarely lost entirely, but often carefully hidden, waiting for tools or minds capable of revealing it. In these manuscripts, the past reaches forward through a series of deliberate gestures, a faint, resilient voice speaking through erasure, a silent record of what was once known, or at least feared enough to conceal. Modern technology has radically transformed our ability to peer into these hidden layers. Multispectral imaging allows scholars to detect traces of ink, invisible under ordinary light, revealing characters, symbols, and diagrams that had lain dormant for centuries. Some palimpsests yield surprising correlations with other archaeological and historical records, hinting at a transmission of knowledge across cultures and eras. Unidentified scripts suggest the survival of languages or dialects long vanished, raising questions about the breadth of literacy, scholarship, and ritual practice in antiquity. By analysing the chemical composition of inks, researchers can distinguish between original writing and subsequent revisions, uncovering a timeline of intellectual activity that often spans centuries. Each page thus becomes a map, not merely of information, but of historical intent, of the choices made by scribes, scholars, and custodians across time. The palimpsests also reveal an aesthetic dimension that is often overlooked. Even beneath the overwriting, the alignment of letters, the spacing of lines, and the subtle interplay of curves and angles convey a sense of rhythm and form. In some cases, the erased texts appear to have been deliberately positioned to interact with later writing, creating visual and cognitive juxtapositions that transcend simple textual replacement. The manuscripts themselves are objects of layered art, demonstrating that the act of erasure was as much creative as it was corrective. They embody a philosophy in which knowledge, memory, and visual form are inseparable, and where the materiality of the manuscript mediates the experience of learning, contemplation, and spiritual engagement. Perhaps most haunting of all is the suggestion that some of these palimpsests preserve knowledge deemed too dangerous, too heretical, or too powerful for general consumption. Fragments hint at cosmological understanding, ritual practice, or historical accounts that diverge sharply from sanctioned histories. In some cases, these traces suggest awareness of natural events, astronomical cycles, or philosophical concepts that would later be rediscovered only centuries afterward. The very act of overwriting, therefore, may be understood as an attempt to control memory, to shape collective understanding, and to regulate the survival of knowledge. Yet the palimpsests, by their layered nature, resist complete control, offering glimpses of what was hidden and inviting the careful observer into a dialogue across time. In handling a Vatican palimpsest, one is confronted with the profound temporality of human thought. Each page embodies multiple epochs: the original composition, its deliberate erasure, the overwriting, and the centuries of conservation that brought it to the present. To read such a manuscript is not merely to interpret text, but to trace the echoes of decisions made across generations. Decisions about what is sacred, what is dangerous, what is worthy of memory, and what must be obscured. Every smear, every faint indentation, every ghostly trace of a letter or diagram carries significance. In these silences, history itself whispers, inviting us to consider the fragility of knowledge, the impermanence of authority, and the persistence of hidden truth. As we contemplate the Vatican palimpsests, it becomes clear that these documents are more than archival curiosities. They are vessels of memory and intention, repositories of what was once known and later suppressed. They embody the delicate tension between revelation and concealment, between the human desire to understand and the equally human impulse to control, to censor, to protect. And in their layered pages, fragments of lost civilizations, forgotten rituals, and possibly even pre-flood accounts linger, obscured, but not destroyed. Each palimpsest is a puzzle, a coded historical ghost, demanding from us a patient, reverent attention and a willingness to dwell in ambiguity, to trace the contours of knowledge that persists across erasure, and to imagine the worlds that might have been preserved in ink, overwritten yet never truly lost. Chapter 5. Codex Vaticanus. Latinus 3868. Within the shadowed halls of the Vatican Library lies Codex Vaticanus, Latinus 3868, a manuscript whose pages hum with the faint echo of machinery, long silent. Unlike texts devoted solely to theology or philosophy, this Latin codex presents enigmatic treatises on metallurgy, mechanical devices, and the manipulation of materials, rendered in a script that speaks both to precision and to secrecy. The diagrams, often delicate but intricately detailed, depict contraptions that resemble hydraulic machines, water-lifting devices, and mechanisms that could, by some interpretations, qualify as early automata. These are not illustrations of simple tools. They appear as complex, functional designs, hinting at an understanding of engineering principles remarkably sophisticated for the centuries in which the manuscript was likely composed. Each page exudes the sense that it holds practical knowledge, a knowledge that might have been applied, tested, or deliberately encoded to survive only in written form. The origins of the codex remain uncertain, a question that has fueled both scholarly intrigue and speculation. Some researchers suggest connections to Alexandrian engineers, pointing to the synthesis of Greek and Egyptian mechanical knowledge evident in certain diagrams. The precision of gearing systems, the depiction of pulleys, and the careful notation of materials imply that the author, or authors, possessed hands-on familiarity with machines and metals, knowledge that may have been transmitted orally, then codified, through a lineage that stretched across the Mediterranean long before the rise of the Roman Empire. If these conjectures hold, the Codex might preserve fragments of technology that predates conventional histories, suggesting a continuity of mechanical expertise that mainstream narratives rarely acknowledge. It is as though the manuscript carries the memory of civilizations whose practical and theoretical understanding of materials and motion has been partially erased from collective consciousness. The diagrams themselves are striking for their clarity and abstraction. Some show water-driven devices, intricate arrangements of valves and channels, and systems of weights and counterweights, all annotated with Latin terms and measurements that speak to a methodical, almost scientific approach. Others illustrate automata, mechanical figures capable of movement, driven by hidden mechanisms that remain mysterious even to modern engineers. Lines indicating force, motion, and material flow weave across the parchment with precision, suggesting the Codex was not meant merely for reference, but for instruction. Yet the text accompanying these images oscillates between clarity and obfuscation. Certain passages appear straightforward, describing materials and construction methods, while others are phrased allegorically or metaphorically, as if to conceal deeper principles from uninitiated readers. The result is a manuscript that functions both as a technical guide and as a coded archive, preserving practical knowledge within layers of symbolic meaning. Material analysis adds another layer of fascination. The inks and pigments employed in the Codex indicate access to rare mineral compounds and metal-based pigments, likely chosen for durability and visibility on vellum. The careful scribing, the meticulous spacing, and the alignment of diagrams with textual notes suggest an author trained in both technical drafting and manuscript preparation, a rare convergence of skill. The use of Latin rather than Greek or vernacular dialects situates the work within a scholarly milieu capable of bridging classical knowledge and emerging European intellectual traditions. Yet it also raises the question of why such potentially advanced technology was confined to a restricted, elite audience. Was the Codex considered too dangerous for wider dissemination? A repository of knowledge that could alter the balance of power or challenge prevailing assumptions about technological capability? The very secrecy surrounding Codex 3868 has intensified its aura of mystery. For centuries, full access has been restricted, with only a select number of scholars permitted to study its contents under strict supervision. This protective guardianship has fueled speculation that the manuscript contains more than rudimentary mechanical instructions. Could it hold designs capable of feats long thought impossible for pre-modern civilizations? Were these machines ever built, tested, or lost to history? Or do the diagrams encode principles of motion, energy, or metallurgy in a symbolic form meant to preserve the knowledge without enabling replication? The Codex itself offers no answers, only the careful logic of its pages, which invites close observation, reflection, and conjecture. Scholars remain divided in their interpretations. Some argue that the treatises represent purely practical guides, manuals for engineers and metalworkers, the product of a tradition of technical mastery that was quietly transmitted across centuries. Others propose that the manuscripts are allegorical, embedding philosophical or spiritual principles in mechanical forms. A water wheel, for example, might simultaneously illustrate the transfer of force and a metaphor for the movement of cosmic energy. A complex automaton could serve as both demonstration of engineering and reflection on the nature of life and motion. These dualities, the practical and the symbolic, imbue the Codex with a richness that resists straightforward analysis. Every line and annotation carries the weight of intention, suggesting that the manuscript was conceived not only to preserve knowledge, but to engage readers in a slow, contemplative process of discovery. The technological sophistication of Codex 3868 is particularly striking when considered in historical context. While Roman engineers and later medieval artisans possessed significant practical knowledge, the precision and imagination evident in some diagrams suggest a level of understanding rarely documented in surviving sources. Certain mechanical arrangements hint at principles of automation, hydraulics, and force distribution that would not reappear in European manuscripts until centuries later. This raises difficult questions about the continuity of technical knowledge. Was this expertise part of a forgotten tradition, a lineage interrupted by societal upheaval and the collapse of institutions? Or was it deliberately hidden, its dissemination controlled by those who recognized the potential consequences of widespread understanding? In either case, the Codex functions as a rare bridge to a technological past that has largely vanished from conventional records. The manuscript's focus on metallurgy is equally compelling. Pages describe processes for casting, tempering, and shaping metals, with a specificity that suggests practical experimentation and empirical knowledge. Some treatments correspond with techniques known in classical antiquity, while others appear more advanced, implying the refinement of materials science beyond what is commonly attributed to early Europe. The combination of metallurgical insight and mechanical design indicates a holistic approach in which understanding of material properties informs the creation of complex devices. The implication is that these texts were not purely theoretical. They reflect a civilization deeply engaged with the manipulation of natural resources to achieve functional and perhaps extraordinary results. In addition to practical applications, Codex 3868 hints at symbolic or esoteric dimensions of machinery. The careful alignment of diagrams with text, the repetition of certain forms, and the occasional inclusion of obscure notations suggest that the manuscript may encode principles beyond the immediately observable. Some scholars speculate that these annotations preserve knowledge of harmonics, proportional relationships, or the interaction of natural forces, echoing traditions found in Hermetic, Alexandrian, or pre-Roman philosophical treatises. If true, the Codex functions on multiple levels, as a technical manual, a philosophical text, and a vessel for preserving knowledge that might otherwise have been suppressed or lost. For the modern observer, the Codex Vaticanus Latinus 3868 offers a rare opportunity to peer into a world in which technological, artistic, and intellectual traditions intersected in ways that defy linear historical narratives. It challenges assumptions about the capabilities of ancient engineers and artisans, suggesting a continuity of knowledge and skill that extends far beyond what is commonly recognized. Its pages are a dialogue across time, a record of human ingenuity, ambition, and secrecy, preserved through meticulous care and intentional limitation of access. Each diagram, annotation, and textual fragment offers a window into an intelligence capable of imagining and recording devices whose sophistication still inspires awe. As we study the Codex, its pages remain enigmatic yet profoundly evocative. They speak of civilizations attentive to the forces of the natural world, capable of manipulating metals, water, and motion in ways that hint at a scientific heritage obscured by time and discretion. They remind us that knowledge can be preserved, hidden, and transmitted through generations, sometimes in coded or symbolic form, awaiting the perceptive observer. The manuscript offers no certainties, only the invitation to contemplate a world in which engineering, philosophy, and secrecy converge, a world in which human ingenuity sought to engage not only with practical reality, but with the subtle, sometimes dangerous, currents of hidden understanding. Chapter 6. The Sibylline Manuscripts. Deep within the labyrinthine vaults of the Vatican archives lie fragments of a tradition older than Rome itself, the Sibylline Manuscripts. These texts, fragile yet enduring, occupy a space between prophecy, mythology, and cryptic historical record, a convergence of narrative threads that resists simple categorization. Unlike ordinary chronicles or theological treatises, the Sibylline manuscripts operate on multiple levels at once. Their words are poetic, yet precise. They recount visions of celestial upheavals and earthly cataclysms with a rhythm that hints at patterns, sequences, and cycles. Some passages speak of floods that wash across lands, of fires that consume cities, of skies streaked with omens, while others chart the movement of heavenly bodies in ways that suggest careful observation rather than mere allegorical flourish. To read them is to step into a world where myth and recorded memory intertwine, where the past converses with the future, and where encoded knowledge hides in plain sight. The origins of the Sibylline manuscripts are enigmatic. Scholars debate whether these texts are Greek, Etruscan, pre-Roman, or a synthesis of multiple traditions, reflecting centuries of cultural transmission. The earliest fragments appear to have circulated orally, perhaps inscribed in a rudimentary form and carefully copied through generations, yet always selectively preserved. Some manuscripts contain Greek poetic meter, while others display peculiar letter forms and annotation styles hinting at Etruscan influence. In certain cases, marginalia, tiny notes or numerical sequences written in ink, barely perceptible to the eye, suggest the presence of hidden codes, possibly astronomical data or calendrical calculations. These annotations are faint yet deliberate, and they imply that the manuscripts were intended not only to inspire or warn, but to conceal knowledge accessible only to those trained in the proper interpretive techniques. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Sibylline manuscripts is their treatment of celestial events. Certain passages describe planetary alignments, eclipses, and star patterns with an accuracy that seems improbable for their presumed era. The texts imply an understanding of precession cycles and recurring astronomical phenomena, which raises compelling questions. Did these seers observe the heavens directly, recording their movements over decades or centuries? Or were they transcribing knowledge inherited from earlier, now lost civilizations? The possibility that these manuscripts preserve pre-flood astronomical knowledge, secrets carefully hidden from conventional history, cannot be dismissed lightly. Marginal annotations, unusual diagrammatic forms, and sequences of numbers often accompany poetic verses, as if to embed precise observational data within a symbolic or literary framework, shielding the information from casual readers while preserving it for posterity. The manuscripts also dwell on cycles of catastrophe, events described in language both cryptic and vivid. Floods rise and recede, earthquakes split cities, and skies darken with unknown celestial phenomena. Some passages blend mythic imagery with geographic markers, hinting at places once known and now obscured. Islands lost beneath water, cities swallowed by sand or stone. The cyclical nature of these prophecies has led some scholars to speculate that they encode memory of ancient cataclysms, events preserved not only as legend, but as practical warning. Patterns repeating across millennia, waiting to be discerned by those who know how to read the symbols. It is here, between poetic imagination and precise observation, that the manuscripts hint at knowledge both scientific and esoteric, knowledge that may have been deliberately cloaked to survive the shifting tides of cultural authority. The Sibylline manuscripts are as much visual as textual. Some fragments contain diagrams that overlay the verses, circular arrangements of letters and symbols that resemble star charts, grids of numbers that may encode celestial movements, or radial drawings that correspond to cycles of sun and moon. These are not random embellishments. They are structured, deliberate, and suggest a sophisticated system of encoding information within poetic form. Scholars who attempt to decode these arrangements encounter patterns that hint at the intersection of astronomy, numerology, and mythology, a synthesis of observational knowledge and symbolic representation. It is as if the seers who authored these texts recognized the potency of form itself. By embedding information in layers of verse, diagram, and marginal notation, they ensured that knowledge could endure centuries of cultural upheaval while remaining obscured to those untrained in its reading. The manuscripts also reveal hints of a worldview in which celestial and terrestrial events are inseparable. Floods, fires, and winds are not merely disasters. They are expressions of cosmic cycles, reflections of patterns observed in the heavens. The texts suggest a philosophy of history as rhythm, repetition, and correspondence, a view echoed in other ancient traditions, yet rarely preserved in the surviving written record. Some scholars propose that the Sibylline seers were transmitting knowledge of these cycles in ways that integrated observation, mathematics, and ritual practice, a form of science interwoven with spirituality, encoded in symbols that appear poetic, but operate as functional guides to understanding time, catastrophe, and celestial order. Beyond astronomy and catastrophe, the manuscripts frequently reference figures and events absent from canonical history. Legendary kings, shadowed civilizations, and figures of wisdom who act as intermediaries between humans and celestial forces populate the verses. In certain passages, obscure rituals and rites are described, often with coded instructions or oblique references. as if to ensure that the knowledge could be reconstructed only by those initiated into the proper interpretive framework. The texts, in this sense, function simultaneously as prophecy, historical record, and esoteric manual, a multi-layered document designed to endure, survive, and challenge interpretation over millennia. Modern study of the Sibylline Manuscripts is a careful, painstaking endeavor. Scholars employ spectral imaging, ultraviolet light, and digital reconstruction to reveal faint annotations and hidden layers. In some cases, these technologies have uncovered previously invisible sequences of numbers and symbols, marginal annotations that align with astronomical phenomena, and patterns that recur across multiple fragments. Yet despite these advances, many aspects of the manuscripts remain elusive. The language, the symbols, and the connections between prophecy and observation resist simple decoding. This elusiveness has contributed to the enduring mystique of the collection. They are texts that demand attention, patience, and a willingness to dwell in uncertainty, where meaning emerges slowly, like faint light through dense clouds. The historical context of these manuscripts also invites reflection. As the Roman world shifted and Christian orthodoxy became dominant, certain forms of knowledge may have been suppressed, deliberately overwritten, or relegated to restricted archives. The Sibylline manuscripts, preserved in such conditions, represent a continuity of memory that spans these cultural transformations. They are simultaneously ancient and modern, a repository of information that has endured through centuries of political, religious, and intellectual upheaval, yet remains tantalizingly incomplete. In this sense, the texts serve as both mirror and window. Mirror of what was once believed, observed, or feared, and window into dimensions of knowledge that remain partially hidden from contemporary understanding. Each manuscript, each fragment, is also a meditation on the nature of preservation itself. The ink, fragile yet resilient, the vellum, carefully prepared and stored, the annotations, hidden in margins and diagrams, all attest to human intention, the desire to maintain knowledge across time, even when the transmission of that knowledge was fraught with risk. There is a deliberate layering of meaning, an understanding that some truths can be preserved only if encoded, if partially hidden, if intertwined with myth, poetry, and symbolism. In this way, the Sibylline manuscripts stand as testament to the resilience of thought, imagination, and observation, surviving centuries of loss, neglect, and censorship to speak softly to those who know how to listen. The manuscripts ultimately occupy a liminal space between certainty and ambiguity. They are poetic, yet precise, mythic, yet historical, cryptic, yet instructive. Their prophecies suggest cycles, their diagrams hint at science, and their annotations whisper of secrets once regarded as too dangerous or sacred to reveal openly. They challenge modern assumptions about the capabilities of ancient observers, the depth of pre-Roman cosmological knowledge, and the capacity for encoded wisdom to endure through centuries of deliberate concealment. In their layered complexity, the Sibylline manuscripts invite contemplation, drawing the observer into a meditation on the intersections of memory, myth, and celestial observation, a meditation that stretches across time, leaving questions unresolved and possibilities ever open. Chapter 7. Codex Vaticanus, Graecus, 1209, hidden among the countless manuscripts of the Vatican Library. Codex Vaticanus Graecus 1209 occupies a rarefied space where philosophy, mysticism, and chemistry converge. This Greek codex, delicate yet enduring, contains fragments of hermetic writings, alchemical treatises, and obscure cosmological reflections, preserved with a meticulousness that speaks to both reverence and caution. Its pages are a silent testimony to a tradition that claims origins far older than medieval Europe, a continuity of thought that links the wisdom of Hellenistic Alexandria with strands of knowledge from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and perhaps even older, unrecorded civilizations. The very presence of the manuscript within the Vatican suggests its dual nature, a work preserved for its profound insight, yet carefully guarded, perhaps because the knowledge it contains could challenge orthodox interpretations, or reveal principles considered dangerous if misapplied. The texts themselves are dense, layered with meaning, and resistant to superficial reading. On one level, they discuss material transformation, the manipulation of substances, the refinement of metals, and the transmutation of base elements into higher states. But these instructions are seldom purely practical. The Codex interweaves chemical processes with philosophical reflection, implying that the act of transformation mirrors the ascent of consciousness, the harmonization of cosmos and self. Hermetic principles pulse through these pages. The unity of above and below, the interplay of microcosm and macrocosm, the subtle correspondences that govern both matter and spirit. Some passages hint at operations and procedures that suggest a knowledge of chemical reactions, sublimation, and distillation far beyond what is usually attributed to the early medieval period. The implication is remarkable. These writings may encode a form of science fused with spirituality, a disciplined observation of natural processes entwined with metaphysical insight. Marginalia and annotations enhance the mystery. Tiny symbols, obscure sigils, and cryptic characters appear alongside the text, sometimes accompanying phrases, sometimes isolated in the corners of the page. Some of these marks have resisted translation or categorization, suggesting they are not decorative but functional, part of a coded system intended to safeguard deeper knowledge. Were these symbols mnemonic devices, a way to guide a trained reader through complex operations? Or did they serve as protective measures, rendering certain aspects of the text opaque to those uninitiated in Hermetic study? The uncertainty adds weight to the manuscript's aura. Each annotation, each subtle flourish of ink, may contain a secret deliberately withheld from general scrutiny. The cosmological content of the Codex is equally compelling. Several passages describe the movement of celestial bodies, the interrelation of planets, and cycles that imply an understanding of patterns later formalized in modern astronomy. These references are embedded within allegorical narrative, often framed as dialogue between teacher and disciple, or as meditative reflection on the hidden order of the universe. One recurring theme is the correspondence between material processes and celestial rhythms. Metals undergo transformations analogous to planetary motion, and the refinement of substances mirrors the harmonization of cosmic forces. Such thinking suggests a worldview in which observation, experiment, and contemplation are inseparable, and where the material world itself is a reflection of higher, unseen principles. The manuscript's language and composition further hint at its antiquity. Written in careful Greek script, the text exhibits variations in style and orthography that imply multiple layers of copying, revision, and annotation over centuries. Paleographers note that certain passages preserve archaic forms, likely carried forward from original sources that may have existed in Hellenistic or Alexandrian libraries, now lost to history. This layering suggests that the Codex is not merely a static record, but a dynamic vessel, preserving the intellectual lineage of Hermetic thought, while allowing each generation to leave subtle marks, interpretations and cautions for the next. In this sense, the Codex itself becomes a living artifact, its physical form a medium for temporal dialogue across centuries. Some researchers are particularly struck by the combination of alchemical and philosophical elements. Unlike modern chemistry, the operations described in the Codex are inseparable from ethical, spiritual, or cosmological reflection. The transformation of substances is always mirrored by a transformation of the self, an alignment of internal and external realities. This duality may account for the Vatican's cautious preservation. The text is not merely informative, but transformative, potentially altering the reader's perception of nature, matter, and humanity's place within the cosmos. Such power, even in the hands of learned clergy, could be unsettling, and yet the Codex has survived, carefully conserved, as if recognition of both its value and its danger demanded restraint. Diagrams and symbolic illustrations are sparse but significant. Circular patterns, interlocking triangles, and abstract forms appear sporadically, sometimes in isolation, sometimes entwined with the text. These illustrations are not decorative. They appear to encode principles of balance, proportion, and interaction between forces. Some scholars have suggested that these patterns correspond to alchemical cycles or stages of material refinement, while others argue that they function as meditative tools, guiding the reader's understanding of processes that cannot be conveyed by words alone. In this way, the manuscript bridges textual and visual cognition, presenting knowledge that is at once intellectual, sensory, and experiential. The question of secrecy permeates the Codex. Why was it preserved so diligently within a closed archive? Why were access and interpretation limited to select scholars over centuries? The answer may lie in the manuscript's potential to convey knowledge that blurs conventional boundaries between science and mysticism, practice and philosophy, observation and revelation. It represents an intellectual power that could disrupt accepted hierarchies of knowledge, reveal principles of natural law long considered speculative, or inspire practices deemed heretical. In this context, preservation becomes inseparable from discretion, and the careful attention of successive custodians ensured the manuscript's survival while minimizing exposure to misuse. Even the materiality of the codex reinforces its significance. The vellum, the inks, and the pigments employed in its pages reflect both durability and deliberation. In some sections, faded traces suggest the use of metallic compounds or rare mineral pigments, applied in ways that resist chemical degradation. These choices, practical yet symbolic, hint at a worldview in which the medium itself participates in the preservation and transmission of knowledge. The Codex is therefore not merely a collection of texts, but a carefully constructed artifact, where form, material, and content interact to safeguard the wisdom it contains. To engage with Codex Vaticanus Graecus 1209 is to confront a nexus of intellectual history that spans millennia. The hermetic fragments, alchemical treatises, and cosmological reflections offer glimpses into a lineage of thought that predates medieval Europe, reaching back into a horizon of knowledge that is partially lost, partially concealed, yet persistent. The manuscript invites slow contemplation, demanding that the observer attune to subtle connections, recognize layered meanings, and consider knowledge in multiple registers simultaneously. It is a text that resists completion, offering fragments, symbols, and hints, never fully revealing the breadth of its insight, yet compelling the reader to consider possibilities that extend far beyond conventional historical narratives. Ultimately, Codex 1209 is both a repository and a challenge. It preserves hermetic knowledge, possibly inherited from ancient civilizations, and simultaneously insists on careful, respectful engagement. Its marginalia, symbolic diagrams, and layered texts remind us that knowledge is not always meant to be fully accessible, that the guardianship of wisdom may demand both secrecy and patience. For those who study it, the manuscript offers a meditation on the intersection of intellect, observation, and spirit, a meditation in which questions are as essential as answers, and where the faint traces of hidden insight continue to whisper across the centuries. Chapter 8. The Vatican Apocrypha Collection. Hidden behind heavy doors, within the labyrinthine corridors of the Vatican Library, lies a vast and largely inaccessible archive, the Apocrypha Collection. Thousands of manuscripts, gospels, letters, and revelations accumulate here, silent witnesses to narratives often at odds with the canonical histories familiar to the world. These texts, preserved under the watchful guardianship of generations of clerics and scholars, contain versions of events surrounding Christ, his disciples, and the early Christian communities that challenge the mainstream theological framework. They offer glimpses of alternative chronologies, unexplored interactions, and interpretations that have never entered the public consciousness. The sheer volume of these manuscripts is staggering, and yet they are not merely duplicates or minor variants. Many are strikingly distinct, conveying subtleties and details absent in traditional scripture, raising profound questions about what was remembered, what was altered, and what was deliberately hidden. Some apocryphal gospels recount events with a clarity that suggests eyewitness testimony, while others are visionary, filled with allegorical symbolism, numerological patterns, and celestial motifs. In certain texts, the narrative intertwines the familiar story of Christ with echoes of pre-flood traditions, enigmatic references to lost civilizations, and arcane cosmologies long thought forgotten. Scholars examining these manuscripts have noted recurring symbols, sequences of numbers that correspond to astronomical cycles, geometric diagrams reminiscent of sacred architecture, and allegorical visions that hint at ancient esoteric knowledge. The precise meaning of these elements remains elusive, yet their presence implies that the authors intended to encode knowledge beyond the immediate narrative. Some argue that these symbols were meant to preserve memory of older human traditions, knowledge passed down through generations, perhaps reaching back to civilizations erased by cataclysmic events. The letters and revelations present in the collection are equally compelling. Correspondences between early Christian leaders, long excluded from the canonical epistles, reveal disputes, doctrinal debates, and accounts of communities responding to crises now forgotten. These texts suggest a world far more complex than the neat linear histories later constructed. Here, theological ideas intermingle with practical concerns, managing community, recording signs and omens, and navigating the tension between spiritual insight and temporal authority. At times, the manuscripts suggest that early Christians were in dialogue with or influenced by traditions outside the Judaic Christian framework, including Hellenistic, Egyptian, and Mesopotamian thought. The depth and breadth of these influences point toward a syncretic environment where knowledge circulated freely, only to be later curated, suppressed, or codified into orthodoxy. One of the most mysterious aspects of the Vatican Apocrypha collection is the presence of numerology and coded symbolism. Certain manuscripts meticulously annotate events with numeric sequences, ratios, and correspondences that appear to reflect both historical and cosmological patterns. Scholars have debated whether these were mnemonic tools, mystical encodings, or perhaps records of celestial and temporal cycles observed by the early authors. In some cases, the symbols hint at connections between biblical history and pre-flood civilizations, as if knowledge of earlier cataclysms, genealogies, and sacred architecture had been transmitted under the guise of spiritual allegory. The suggestion is subtle, yet profound. These manuscripts may preserve fragments of human memory that mainstream history has lost, concealed behind the twin veils of secrecy and orthodoxy. Material analysis further adds to the intrigue. The manuscripts are composed of parchment, papyrus, and occasionally vellum of varying ages and origins, sometimes repurposed from older texts. Ink composition ranges from standard carbon-based formulas to rare metallic compounds, suggesting deliberate choice and careful preparation. In some fragments, faint palimpsestic traces reveal texts overwritten by later scribes, indicating layers of knowledge deliberately hidden or preserved through concealment. These physical characteristics reinforce the notion that the manuscripts were considered valuable not only for their content, but also for their materiality, the very medium serving as a vessel for safeguarding forbidden or dangerous knowledge. Scholarly engagement with the Apocrypha collection is cautious and methodical. For centuries, access was restricted to a select few, and only in recent decades have imaging technologies revealed hidden details without physically opening the fragile codices. Ultraviolet and multispectral imaging have uncovered marginal notes, erased words, and symbolic annotations invisible to the naked eye, exposing a dimension of encoded knowledge layered over the visible text. Each revelation intensifies the mystery, hidden truths within hidden truths, suggesting an archive deliberately constructed to endure while resisting casual interpretation. The manuscripts function as both historical record and enigmatic puzzle, preserving a delicate balance between disclosure and secrecy. The content of the apocryphal Gospels is strikingly diverse. Some recount alternative narratives of miracles, journeys, and teachings attributed to Christ or his disciples. Others delve into visionary experiences, where apostles report dreams, signs in the sky, or interactions with angelic entities. The imagery is vivid, yet often elliptical, leaving the reader to decode symbolic correspondences and implicit meaning. Certain texts incorporate lists of names, genealogies, and chronologies that do not appear elsewhere, suggesting an attempt to preserve memory beyond what was sanctioned or canonized. These deviations, when juxtaposed with canonical scripture, raise questions about what criteria guided inclusion or exclusion, and who determined which truths were to remain public and which were to remain secret. The apocryphal letters reveal an equally complex picture. Correspondence between early church leaders indicates not only theological debate, but also social, political, and geographic concerns. Communities navigated persecution, natural disasters, and political shifts, often recording these experiences alongside spiritual insight. In many cases, these documents suggest knowledge of astronomical events, cycles of time, or natural phenomena tied to sacred observances, details that conventional histories rarely mention. This confluence of empirical observation, spiritual interpretation, and communal memory underscores the manuscript's dual nature. They are both practical record and esoteric archive, blending observation and belief in ways that challenge modern assumptions about the transmission of knowledge in antiquity. Perhaps most compelling is the sense of deliberate preservation. coupled with deliberate obfuscation. Certain manuscripts contain passages that are clearly encoded with letters, numbers, and symbols arranged in ways that resist straightforward reading. Some annotations appear to have been added later, obscuring portions of the text while preserving them for those capable of deciphering the code. This raises a fundamental question. Were these manuscripts suppressed primarily for doctrinal reasons, or were they also recognized as repositories of knowledge considered politically or culturally dangerous? The answer remains unresolved, but the intentional layering of text, the selective erasures, and the coded annotations all point toward a sophisticated strategy of preservation and concealment, a recognition of the power contained within these pages. The Vatican Apocrypha collection is therefore a repository of multiple temporalities. Within its pages, ancient memory, early Christian interpretation, and echoes of older, possibly pre-flood traditions converge. Each manuscript embodies a dialogue across generations. The authors, scribes, and annotators collectively crafting a record that preserves what might otherwise have been lost. The texts remind us that history is never singular. It is an accumulation of voices, some celebrated, others suppressed, all contributing to the complex, layered fabric of human memory. Engaging with the collection is an invitation into a world where certainty dissolves into possibility. The manuscripts offer glimpses of events, knowledge, and spiritual practices that mainstream history has often overlooked or deliberately sidelined. They hint at a continuity of human understanding that transcends chronological boundaries, linking early Christianity with traditions that predate the Roman world. The interplay of narrative, numerology, and symbolic imagery suggests that the authors of these manuscripts were not merely chroniclers, but custodians of a memory they understood to be fragile, powerful, and potentially dangerous if misinterpreted. In their entirety, the apocryphal texts form a vast, partially illuminated landscape of forgotten or suppressed knowledge. They challenge the observer to consider the selective nature of historical memory, the forces that determine which stories are canonized and which are hidden, and the possibility that some truths about human origins, civilization, and cosmic cycles remain preserved in secret, awaiting careful discovery. In this sense, the Vatican Apocrypha collection is more than a repository. It is a meditation on the endurance of knowledge, the fragility of history, and the subtle interplay between secrecy and revelation that has shaped our understanding of the past. Chapter 9, Codex Vaticanus, 1291, Magical Papyri. Within the hidden chambers of the Vatican Library lies Codex Vaticanus, 1291, a collection of papyri whose faded edges and delicate fibers carry whispers from a time when magic, science, and spirituality were inseparable. Dated to the late Roman period, these texts present an extraordinary synthesis of ritual, mathematics, and celestial observation, suggesting a worldview in which the forces of nature were not merely observed, but engaged with, invoked, and, in some sense, negotiated. The papyri include spells intended to heal, protect, or influence events, alongside invocations to deities and spirits whose names, in many cases, are unrecorded elsewhere. Yet the true intrigue lies not simply in the magical content, but in the meticulous integration of mathematical and astronomical calculations, often specifying the positions of the stars, the phase of the moon, or planetary alignments necessary for efficacy. These are not careless instructions. They reveal a sophistication suggesting observation and experimentation, a precise alignment between ritual action and cosmic rhythm. The content of Codex 1291 oscillates between the practical and the symbolic. Some rituals, when read superficially, appear almost theatrical, sequences of words, gestures, and offerings whose meaning might escape the modern scholar. Yet beneath these layers lies a lattice of intention and timing, suggesting that the ancients may have encoded knowledge of celestial cycles, planetary motion, and natural forces in forms now misunderstood as mere superstition. Certain incantations reference numerical sequences whose significance is mathematical as well as symbolic, hinting at a comprehension of ratios, harmonics, or cyclical patterns in nature that resonate with the movements of the heavens. These papyri do not merely reflect spiritual belief, they hint at a methodology, a disciplined framework for interacting with the cosmos. Anthropologists studying these texts emphasize that their significance extends beyond the supernatural. The papyri illuminate a culture in which magic and science were not oppositional but complementary, To recite a spell was simultaneously to enact a symbolic representation of cosmic order and to manipulate energy through careful observation of timing and proportion. The repeated attention to celestial alignment, for example, suggests that practitioners understood, in empirical terms, the rhythms of planetary cycles and their perceived influence on terrestrial events. In this way, Codex 1291 bridges the material and immaterial. The ritual gestures are tangible, yet they operate within a conceptual framework that spans the heavens and the earth, the visible and the invisible. Material analysis of the papyri underscores the deliberate care in their creation. The thin, brittle sheets were inscribed with inks containing mixtures of carbon, ochre, and occasionally metallic compounds, sometimes in colors that would persist through centuries. These choices were not merely functional, they likely served symbolic and protective purposes, reinforcing the potency of the ritual through the very materials of the manuscript. Scholars examining the texts have also noted revisions, corrections, and interlinear notes, suggesting that these documents were not static, but living records, refined, tested, and modified over time. Each correction or added line may reflect the outcome of practice, an evolving understanding of forces that were as empirical as they were mystical. The mathematical and astronomical elements of Codex 1291 are among its most enigmatic features. Certain rituals are anchored to precise celestial configurations, with instructions that indicate awareness of lunar cycles, solar positions, and even the retrograde motion of planets. Some passages include diagrams resembling early star charts, or geometric figures whose proportions correspond to numerical sequences embedded in the text. These elements suggest that the authors possess knowledge that, in some cases, predates or parallels later formalized astronomy. Could these papyri encode remnants of pre-Christian wisdom, inherited from Egyptian, Mesopotamian, or Hellenistic traditions? The evidence hints at a continuity of understanding, a transmission of insight through ritual, allegory, and numerical encoding, preserved with painstaking care in a manuscript whose contents were considered too dangerous or powerful for general circulation. Interpretation of the spells themselves requires an appreciation for the cultural context. The magical papyri often prescribe sequences of actions combining words, gestures, and symbols. Some rituals appear designed to summon protective forces, others to repel disease, misfortune, or spiritual attack. Yet underlying these instructions is a subtle architecture of observation. Practitioners timed their work with the rhythms of the cosmos, noting the conjunctions of stars or the phases of the moon. This indicates that while framed in the language of magic, these practices were in some sense empirical, reflecting centuries of observation and experience. The texts therefore occupy a liminal space between belief and experiment, intuition and calculation, suggesting that the boundary between ritual and science was far more fluid than modern categorizations allow. The preservation of Codex 1291 within the Vatican further amplifies its aura of secrecy. Access was tightly controlled for centuries, fueling speculation that the manuscripts contained knowledge deemed too potent for public consumption. Were the rituals preserved simply as cultural artifacts, or did their custodians recognize the potential of the papyri to convey knowledge capable of influencing natural or social order? The careful custody, coupled with restricted exposure, implies that those who safeguarded these texts were aware of both their practical and symbolic power, maintaining a balance between preservation and discretion. The layering of knowledge within the papyri extends beyond the visible surface. Imaging technologies have revealed faint undertexts and erased annotations, hinting at previous generations of scribes adding, correcting, or concealing content. Some fragments contain symbols that remain undeciphered, suggesting encoded wisdom designed to be accessible only to trained initiates. The result is a manuscript that operates on multiple levels: narrative, symbolic, numeric, and celestial. Each layer is a dialogue across time, linking the experiences and insights of practitioners separated by centuries, yet united in their pursuit of understanding the subtle forces of the universe. The philosophical implications of Codex 1291 are as profound as its practical instructions. The text reflects a conception of the universe as an interconnected system, in which human action and cosmic order are entwined. Rituals are not merely attempts to compel or persuade unseen forces. They are conscious engagements with patterns, rhythms, and harmonics perceived in the natural world. In this sense, The papyri encode a sophisticated epistemology. Knowledge gained through observation, reflection, and ritualized action, transmitted across generations, informs that intertwined science, mathematics, and spirituality. Even the visual elements of the manuscript, occasional diagrams, star maps, or schematic representations of ritual implements, contribute to this integrative vision. These images are neither ornamental nor didactic in a conventional sense. They serve as tools for cognition, guiding practitioners to perceive correspondences between microcosm and macrocosm, between human intention and celestial movement. The imagery, in concert with text and numeric annotation, forms a multidimensional system of knowledge that resists simple categorization, demanding engagement on multiple levels of perception and understanding. Ultimately, Codex Vaticanus 1291 is more than a collection of spells. It is a repository of human curiosity, a testament to an era in which the boundaries between empirical observation, mystical insight, and spiritual practice were porous. The papyri challenge modern assumptions about the separation of science and magic, suggesting that ancient thinkers approached the universe holistically, seeking patterns, principles, and methods of interaction that encompassed both visible and invisible dimensions. In their preservation, secrecy, and deliberate obfuscation, these manuscripts remind us that knowledge is both fragile and powerful, its transmission dependent on care, intent, and sometimes concealment. Engaging with Codex 1291 is to confront a fragment of a worldview largely lost to time, a civilization of thought in which human action, celestial order, and spiritual intent converged. The papyri offer questions more than answers. What knowledge did they preserve? How were these techniques understood and applied? And why did their custodians deem them too potent for broader dissemination? In this collection of texts, we glimpse a continuum of wisdom, bridging eras, blending empirical observation with symbolic insight, and preserving an understanding of the cosmos that is at once practical, mystical, and profoundly human. Chapter 10. The secret codices of Avicenna within the vaulted halls of the Vatican. Behind layers of protective custody and centuries of restriction reside a number of rare manuscripts attributed to Avicenna, or Ibn Sina, the polymath whose influence stretched from medicine to metaphysics. These codices, held in secrecy far longer than most Western repositories have maintained knowledge, contain insights into anatomy, astronomy, and philosophical thought that, in some cases, appear centuries ahead of their acknowledged rediscovery in Europe. The texts themselves are intricate, their pages filled with diagrams, marginal annotations, and carefully constructed schemas that suggest an integrated vision of the human body, the cosmos, and the interrelation between the two. Each codex radiates a quiet intensity, a sense that its contents were meant to preserve knowledge both practical and profound, perhaps too potent to be widely disseminated in their time. The medical treatises within these codices are remarkable for their precision. Avicenna's observations on human anatomy demonstrate an understanding of organ systems, circulatory pathways, and the interdependence of bodily functions that aligns closely with knowledge thought to have emerged centuries later. Some diagrams depict the musculature, skeletal frameworks, and vascular structures with clarity and proportion, suggesting first-hand anatomical study. Yet these visualizations also incorporate symbolic notation, indicating a dual purpose: empirical observation intertwined with philosophical or metaphysical reflection. The manuscripts suggest that medicine, for Avicenna and the custodians who preserved his work, was never merely technical. It was a lens through which to understand the human condition in relation to the cosmos. Astronomical insights within the codices are equally compelling. Some pages feature star charts and celestial schematics that correlate planetary alignments with cycles of human health, philosophical principles, or natural events. Certain annotations imply knowledge of precession and planetary motion well before such concepts were formally recognized in European texts. The diagrams are meticulous, suggesting that these scholars were observing the heavens with mathematical rigor, recording patterns that might otherwise have been lost. Their inclusion within texts primarily framed as medical or philosophical treatises indicates that the pursuit of knowledge was holistic. Understanding the body was inseparable from understanding the universe, and the universe was inseparable from understanding one's place within it. Philosophical discourse permeates the codices, weaving together metaphysics, ethics, and epistemology. Avicenna's synthesis of Aristotelian and Neoplatonic thought appears alongside practical guidance for the cultivation of the mind and body, hinting at an intellectual framework in which spiritual, physical, and cosmic laws were interdependent. Marginalia suggests that these manuscripts were revisited, annotated, and perhaps even deliberately obfuscated to shield certain insights from casual readers. Scholars examining these texts have speculated whether such measures were motivated by concern over doctrinal authority, political influence, or the sheer transformative potential of the knowledge contained within. Whatever the intent, the result is a collection that speaks in layered voices, bridging centuries of intellectual pursuit while leaving critical questions unresolved. The material composition of the codices offers further insight into their significance. The manuscripts are composed of vellum and fine parchment, carefully bound and inked with substances designed to endure the passage of time. In some cases, the inks include metallic compounds that have resisted fading for centuries, preserving delicate diagrams and annotations that might otherwise have vanished. These choices suggest a deliberate investment in permanence, a recognition that the knowledge contained within was both valuable and vulnerable. Even the arrangement of the pages, the order of the diagrams, and the careful separation of sections imply a codified structure intended to guide the reader through layers of understanding, from the empirical to the metaphysical. The interplay between science and spirituality within these codices is perhaps their most enigmatic feature. Anatomical diagrams coexist with cosmic maps, planetary tables, and philosophical reflections, creating a continuum in which observation, intuition, and reflection are inseparable. The texts imply a worldview in which the human body mirrors cosmic principles, and in which mastery of knowledge is inseparable from ethical and spiritual cultivation. It is as though Avicenna, and those who preserved his work, intended the codices to serve as instruments of both instruction and contemplation, offering guidance on how to live, think, and observe in alignment with the natural and cosmic order. Historians and manuscript experts have noted peculiar features suggesting deliberate concealment or selective dissemination. Some passages are heavily annotated, others appear partially erased or overwritten, and certain diagrams are cryptically coded. These layers may indicate that the manuscripts were designed to transmit knowledge selectively, accessible only to those trained or initiated in specific methods of reading and interpretation. The secrecy surrounding their storage within the Vatican adds to this impression, suggesting that the manuscripts were not merely preserved for posterity, but actively safeguarded to control the circulation of transformative knowledge. Beyond the technical and philosophical content, the codices offer glimpses of intellectual networks spanning continents. References and allusions within the texts point to influences from Greek, Persian, and early Islamic scholarship, hinting at a continuum of knowledge flowing across cultures long before the European Renaissance. The codices thus become a lens through which we can glimpse the interconnectedness of ancient intellectual traditions, preserved in a repository that valued both their power and their potential danger. Reading the codices is an exercise in patience and attentiveness. Their complex diagrams, subtle annotations, and careful sequencing resist hasty interpretation. One must observe the patterns between anatomical detail and cosmic mapping, between philosophical aphorism and practical instruction. This deliberate pacing mirrors the intended experience of the manuscript's original readers, a slow immersion into knowledge that bridges observation and reflection, practical skill and contemplative understanding. The codices invite a rhythm of study that aligns with their content, a rhythm in which the mind, the senses, and the spirit are engaged simultaneously. The secretive nature of the codices has fueled speculation for centuries. Why were such texts, containing knowledge that could advance medicine, astronomy, and philosophy, confined to the Vatican's restricted archives? Some scholars propose that suppression was motivated by religious or political concerns. Knowledge capable of challenging accepted authority, revealing human potential, or altering cosmological understanding may have been considered too powerful for general access. Others suggest that the manuscripts were preserved precisely because they were seen as dangerous or transformative, their contents too significant to risk misinterpretation. Whatever the case, the codices' survival attests to the care with which they were curated, maintained and guarded across generations. In their entirety, The secret codices of Avicenna offer a remarkable vision of knowledge that transcends conventional categories. Medicine, astronomy, and philosophy are not compartmentalized, but interwoven into a holistic understanding of existence. The manuscripts embody a continuum of learning, bridging ancient observation, spiritual insight, and empirical investigation, suggesting that centuries of intellectual tradition were preserved, even if partially hidden, within their pages. They remind us that the pursuit of knowledge is not merely the accumulation of facts, but a disciplined engagement with the world, a process of attuning oneself to both the human and the cosmic order. As one contemplates these manuscripts, the questions persist. How much knowledge predates accepted timelines? How were such advanced insights transmitted and preserved? And why were they hidden? To what extent does the integration of science and spirituality in these texts reflect a worldview now largely forgotten? In exploring the secret codices of Avicenna, we are drawn into a continuum of understanding that spans centuries, challenging the boundaries of historical perception and inviting reflection on the preservation, suppression, and transformation of knowledge itself. The codices also reveal the subtle ways in which knowledge was encoded to survive turbulent historical epochs. Marginal notes, interlinear annotations, and occasional corrections suggest that scribes and custodians actively engaged with the texts, adding clarifications, cross-references, or even cryptic symbols that may have served as mnemonic devices or secret keys to interpretation. These layers of editorial attention imply an ongoing dialogue between successive generations of scholars and the manuscripts themselves, a continuity of intellectual curiosity that transcended centuries of political and religious upheaval. Some marginalia, barely visible without careful examination, hint at practical experiments, anatomical dissections, or astronomical observations, carried out in parallel with the written guidance, a subtle record of applied knowledge that could only be fully appreciated by those trained to read between the lines. The diagrams themselves merit particular attention. Certain illustrations depict the human circulatory system with a precision that rivals Renaissance-era works, yet they coexist alongside cosmological schematics linking bodily functions to planetary cycles, lunar phases, and celestial alignments. The deliberate juxtaposition of these microcosmic and macrocosmic elements suggests an integrated epistemology, one in which understanding the human body was inseparable from understanding the rhythms of the cosmos. For example, a diagram detailing the heart and its associated vessels may be annotated with references to lunar phases or planetary conjunctions, implying a belief that cosmic phenomena influenced physiological processes, a perspective both mystical and empirical, blending observation with interpretation. Philosophical discourse within these codices extends beyond metaphysics and ethics. It addresses epistemology itself, the nature of knowledge, the methods of inquiry, and the ethical responsibilities of the scholar. Avicenna's writings probe the limits of human understanding, while simultaneously providing practical guidance for observation, calculation, and reflection. In doing so, the texts invite the reader to consider knowledge as an active engagement with the world, rather than a passive accumulation of facts. This subtle pedagogy, embedded in diagrams, marginalia, and structured exposition, transforms the codices into instruments of intellectual formation, preparing the reader to perceive hidden correspondences between the human, natural, and celestial orders. The secrecy surrounding these manuscripts adds another layer of intrigue. Centuries of restricted access have fueled speculation that certain insights were deliberately concealed to maintain doctrinal authority, to prevent the misuse of knowledge, or to safeguard ideas considered spiritually or socially transformative. Unlike other scholarly texts, these codices were not intended for broad public readership. They were curated, protected, and in some cases, obscured. Some sections show signs of intentional redaction, faint erasure, or selective highlighting, raising questions about what knowledge was meant to endure and what was deemed too dangerous, advanced, or heretical to circulate openly. It is also worth considering the historical and geographical context of Avicenna's works. The intellectual climate of the medieval Islamic world was one of intense synthesis, drawing upon Greek, Persian, Indian, and earlier Mesopotamian sources. Avicenna's codices reflect this cross-cultural transmission of knowledge, yet their preservation within the Vatican suggests an awareness of their exceptional value and potential influence. The juxtaposition of Eastern philosophical and scientific thought with Western custodianship raises profound questions about the movement of knowledge across cultural and temporal boundaries. How did these ideas survive, evolve, and ultimately find a home in a Western archive centuries later? And what was lost, intentionally or otherwise, in translation and preservation? Furthermore, the codices hint at the potential applications of this integrated knowledge. Certain passages suggest therapeutic practices linked to celestial observation, while others propose methods for aligning one's mental and physical discipline with natural cycles. While modern readers may struggle to reconstruct these techniques fully, their existence underscores a worldview in which knowledge was not abstract but actionable, connecting human behavior with observable cosmic and natural rhythms. The manuscripts, in effect, function as both repositories of theory and guides for practice, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of the interplay between observation, experiment, and philosophical insight. Equally compelling is the codices' reflection of a broader intellectual ethos. They suggest a society in which mastery of the self, the body, and the cosmos were interconnected pursuits, where the cultivation of wisdom, health, and perception were part of a continuum of study and practice. By combining empirical observation with philosophical inquiry and spiritual reflection, the texts present a model of learning that challenges modern distinctions between science, philosophy, and religion. In these pages, the human and cosmic orders are inseparable, and understanding one requires engagement with the other, a vision both ancient and, in many ways, startlingly modern. As we turn the fragile pages of these codices, the questions they provoke remain unresolved. What specific discoveries might have been lost to history due to deliberate concealment or restricted access? How did Avicenna and subsequent custodians ensure that knowledge survived while controlling its circulation? And what might these texts reveal about the continuity of intellectual traditions between East and West, or about the advanced understanding of anatomy, astronomy, and philosophy centuries before Europe acknowledged it? The codices do not offer direct answers, but they invite contemplation, careful study, and a recognition that the boundaries of historical knowledge are often shaped as much by omission as by preservation. In the quiet stillness of the Vatican archives, these manuscripts rest as both relics and instruments, silent witnesses to centuries of scholarship, secrecy, and reverent inquiry. They preserve a vision of knowledge in which observation, reflection, and ritualized practice coalesce, offering insights into the human condition and the cosmos that remain tantalizingly just beyond full comprehension. Each diagram, each marginal annotation, each subtle correction invites the careful observer to reconsider accepted timelines, to probe the integration of science and spirituality, and to acknowledge the depth of wisdom that has survived despite centuries of concealment. The secret codices of Avicenna, in their layered complexity, remind us that knowledge is both fragile and resilient, often preserved under the weight of deliberate secrecy. They are a testament to the intellectual courage of those who recorded, transmitted, and safeguarded these works, and a challenge to modern scholarship to engage with the subtleties encoded within their pages. As we contemplate these codices, the boundaries between past and present, empirical and mystical, visible and hidden, dissolve, leaving only the enduring question: what truths linger in these manuscripts, waiting to illuminate chapters of human understanding that history has long chosen to obscure? Chapter 11. Codex Vaticanus, 1224, Etruscan texts. Among the Vatican's most enigmatic collections lies Codex Vaticanus 1224, a manuscript whose fragile vellum pages preserve traces of a civilization largely vanished from the historical record. The Etruscans, who flourished in central Italy prior to Rome's ascendancy, left few written records, and much of what is known comes from tomb inscriptions, funerary art, and scattered artifacts. Yet within this codex, the faint traces of Etruscan script endure, alongside diagrams and symbolic representations whose meanings continue to elude even the most experienced philologists. The manuscript's pages suggest a sophisticated system of writing, mapping, and notation, hinting at knowledge that may have bridged ritual, astronomy, and possibly geomantic practice. Scholars examining the codex are struck by its complexity. The text does not merely record language, but encodes ideas, observations, and perhaps secrets of a culture whose intellectual heritage has been largely obscured by time and conquest. the linguistic content of Codex 1224 is among its most confounding features. Etruscan, unlike Latin or Greek, remains only partially understood, and the Codex preserves sequences of characters that appear coherent yet resist conventional translation. Certain passages repeat patterns that suggest ritual or ceremonial function, while others seem to record measurements, alignments, or sequences of events. The combination of alphabetic inscription and symbolic diagramming implies a dual purpose, conveying both linguistic meaning and conceptual or cosmological structure. Some researchers have proposed that these notations functioned as mnemonic devices or coded records of sacred knowledge, accessible only to initiates or those trained in Etruscan esoteric traditions. Diagrams within the Codex suggest an advanced engagement with the heavens. Constellations, planetary alignments, and celestial cycles are represented in geometric forms, sometimes accompanied by numerical annotation that hints at early attempts to reconcile observation with measurement. These charts resemble, in concept if not execution, later Hellenistic and Roman astronomical tables, yet their style and notation suggest an independent development rooted in Etruscan cosmology. Some diagrams appear to align specific celestial patterns with geographic markers, leading scholars to speculate on a system of geomantic or divinatory mapping. Was this knowledge intended to guide civic planning, religious ceremony, or both? The purpose remains unresolved, yet the meticulous care evident in the drawings attests to their perceived importance. The Codex also contains forms interpreted as geomantic or ritual schematics. Lines, arcs, and intersections are organized in ways that suggest symbolic or predictive function, perhaps encoding instructions for sacred observances or the placement of monuments. Archaeologists and historians have debated whether these patterns reflect a lost science of terrestrial and celestial correspondence, a sophisticated tradition of environmental and spiritual observation, or a combination of both. In either case, the manuscript implies a cultural sophistication that far exceeds the fragmentary historical record typically attributed to pre-Roman Italy, hinting at a depth of knowledge deliberately shielded from the mainstream historical narrative. Material analysis offers additional insight into the Codex's significance. The vellum, carefully prepared and unusually resilient, indicates that the manuscript was valued not merely as a record, but as an artifact intended to endure. The inks include variations in composition and hue, possibly serving symbolic, functional, or preservative purposes. Subtle erasures and overwrites suggest that multiple hands engage with the Codex over time, refining, correcting, or encoding additional layers of meaning. These interventions may reflect a process of transmission designed to protect the most sensitive content, or to adapt it to evolving ritual and scholarly contexts. The Codex, therefore, is not static. It is a palimpsest of knowledge, a document alive with the intellectual labor of generations. The potential implications of Codex 1224 are profound. If these Etruscan writings do indeed preserve astronomical, geomantic, or ritual knowledge, they suggest that pre-Roman Europe possessed systems of observation and thought comparable in sophistication to those of classical Greece and Mesopotamia. Furthermore, the Codex's presence within the Vatican implies deliberate preservation. Knowledge that might otherwise have been lost to conquest, decay, or cultural erasure was carefully curated, maintained, and protected. What choices guided the Vatican in selecting which texts to safeguard? Which aspects of Etruscan knowledge were considered essential? And which were concealed, whether to maintain doctrinal authority or simply to preserve fragile insight? The relationship between text and diagram within the Codex suggests a holistic epistemology. Language, symbol, and measurement converge, implying a worldview in which words alone were insufficient to convey understanding. Meaning arises through interaction, reading, observing, calculating, and reflecting. This integration of multiple modalities anticipates later traditions in Hellenistic, Roman, and medieval scholarship, suggesting that Etruscan intellectual culture may have influenced subsequent European thought in ways that remain largely unrecognized. The Codex in this light becomes a potential bridge between forgotten pre-Roman knowledge and the classical civilizations that succeeded it. Archaeologists examining the manuscript are also struck by the hints of secrecy embedded in its construction. Marginal notations, faint corrections, and sections overwritten with care suggest that portions of the knowledge were intended to be obscure, accessible only to those with specialized training or authority. This deliberate obfuscation raises questions about the transmission of cultural memory. Were these techniques a form of intellectual gatekeeping, designed to protect sacred knowledge from misuse, or were they a response to the pressures of conquest, cultural assimilation, and historical erasure? The Codex seems to occupy a liminal space between preservation and concealment, a repository of insight whose full meaning has been intentionally veiled. Beyond its technical content, the Codex evokes the intellectual spirit of the Etruscan civilization. Its pages reveal a culture attentive to the relationships between sky, land, and society, capable of complex abstraction, and deeply concerned with the interplay of natural and spiritual forces. The manuscript suggests that the Etruscans possessed conceptual frameworks for understanding time, space, and human action that rivaled those of better documented classical civilizations. That such knowledge has survived only in this veiled form, curated within a Western religious archive, speaks to both its value and its vulnerability. A glimpse of a lost civilization preserved through the care and discretion of subsequent generations. Engaging with Codex Vaticanus, 1224 is thus an exercise in reflection and speculation. The manuscript presents questions that resist definitive answers. To what extent did Etruscan knowledge influence the development of Roman, Greek, or later European thought? How much was deliberately hidden or altered, and why? Could these texts reveal aspects of pre-Roman cosmology, geomancy, or ritual that challenge conventional timelines of intellectual history? Each page, diagram, and annotation invites careful study, not only to decipher symbols or linguistic fragments, but to appreciate the worldview that produced them. A worldview in which language, image, and observation were inseparable instruments of understanding. Ultimately, Codex 1224 is a testament to the persistence of knowledge across time. Despite the erosion of civilizations, the fragility of parchment, and centuries of cultural upheaval, fragments of Etruscan thought endure, offering tantalizing hints of lost intellectual traditions. The manuscript's presence in the Vatican underscores the delicate balance between preservation and suppression, suggesting that what survives often depends on deliberate choices, on the intersection of chance, authority, and reverence. In contemplating this codex, one is confronted with the mysteries of cultural memory itself. What knowledge is transmitted, what is concealed, and what remains tantalizingly just beyond our understanding. Chapter 12: Vatican Herbals and Medical Manuscripts. Within the shadowed halls of the Vatican archives, a series of ancient herbals and medical manuscripts rests in near total obscurity, their vellum pages delicate with age, their texts inscribed with meticulous care. These documents encompass knowledge drawn from the civilizations of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and classical Greece, creating a repository that transcends time and geography. At first glance, the herbals appear to be practical guides, detailed illustrations of plants, careful instructions for preparation, and annotations regarding dosage, habitat, and seasonality. Yet closer examination reveals layers of complexity that suggest a worldview in which medicine, philosophy, and spirituality are inseparably intertwined. These are not merely manuals for healing the body. They are guides to understanding the interplay of nature, humankind, and the cosmos. The manuscripts demonstrate extraordinary specificity. Descriptions of plants include minutiae rarely recorded elsewhere, the precise curvature of leaves, subtle color gradations in flowers, and even the variations of root systems. Some formulas call for combinations of minerals, resins, and botanical extracts in proportions that modern researchers find difficult to replicate. Occasional annotations, cryptic symbols, marginal calculations, or coded references suggest that these remedies were more than purely physical prescriptions. They may encode alchemical principles, symbolic correspondences, or experimental observations. One herb may be associated with lunar cycles, another with planetary alignments, hinting at a sophisticated integration of celestial patterns with terrestrial effects. This duality between observable practice and philosophical or mystical framework marks the manuscripts as exceptional artifacts, defying simplistic categorization as purely medical texts. The historical breadth of these works is remarkable. Some of the content echoes the practices of Mesopotamian physicians, drawing upon knowledge of plants and minerals for digestive, respiratory, or neurological ailments. Other sections preserve Egyptian herbal traditions, including references to poultices, balms, and incense preparations used for ritualistic as well as therapeutic purposes. Classical Greek influences are evident in systematic categorization, theoretical explanations of humors, and philosophical framing of health and disease. Yet the synthesis achieved within these Vatican manuscripts often surpasses what is known from other sources, suggesting that the compilers had access to now lost texts, oral traditions, or experiential knowledge spanning several millennia. Each page thus becomes a dialogue across cultures, a convergence of empirical observation and metaphysical speculation. The illustrations within the herbals merit particular attention. Rendered in delicate ink and pigment, they show an astonishing attention to detail and an almost scientific precision. Yet they are often accompanied by symbols that resist immediate interpretation. A single plant may be overlaid with geometric shapes, lines connecting it to other flora or celestial bodies, or annotations in code-like characters. These additions suggest a layered system of knowledge, one in which the observable properties of a herb are only one dimension of its significance. Some scholars posit that these diagrams may serve as mnemonic devices, aligning the practitioner's understanding of pharmacology with cosmology or ritual, allowing knowledge to be transmitted securely within select circles. Others speculate that the symbols encode practical instructions for preparation under specific astronomical conditions, hinting at an intersection of empirical experimentation and esoteric insight rarely seen in surviving texts. The use of minerals and metals in these manuscripts further emphasizes their alchemical dimension. Certain recipes call for combinations of copper, mercury, or sulfur with botanical extracts, producing compounds whose intended effects remain speculative. Whether these instructions were intended to create actual chemical reactions, to align with symbolic cosmological principles, or to act as ritualized gestures is a question that continues to engage historians and chemists alike. Forensic analysis of some surviving residues in related collections has yielded tantalizing evidence that such preparations may have produced reactions more complex than previously imagined, suggesting a practical experimentation intertwined with symbolic instruction. Another aspect of the Vatican herbals is the degree of editorial annotation over centuries. Multiple layers of marginalia indicate that scholars returned repeatedly to the texts, adding corrections, clarifications, and cryptic commentary. Some notes appear in different inks, suggesting activity across generations. Certain pages exhibit erasures or overwrites, hinting at deliberate concealment of sensitive formulas or methods. These interventions reflect the manuscript's dual role as both practical guides and guarded repositories of esoteric wisdom. The texts themselves are living objects, continuously interpreted, revised, and protected, rather than static records of knowledge frozen in time. The philosophical framework underlying these herbals is equally striking. Health is not merely a biological state, but a condition reflecting the harmony between the individual, the environment, and the cosmos. Illness, in this schema, arises from imbalance, whether material, energetic, or spiritual. The preparation of remedies is therefore inseparable from ritualized attention, timing, and ethical conduct. One cannot extract the medicinal properties of a plant without understanding its relationship to celestial cycles, the moral framework of the practitioner, or the intended spiritual context. This integration anticipates later approaches to holistic medicine and suggests that the custodians of such knowledge were keenly aware of the interdependence between physical and metaphysical realms. The manuscripts also contain hints at forgotten technologies or techniques. Some instructions describe processes that appear technologically advanced for their historical context, methods of distillation, extraction, and preservation that seem far ahead of common practice in medieval Europe. Whether these techniques were experimental innovations, rediscovered ancient methods, or symbolic prescriptions remains a subject of debate. The careful preservation of these manuscripts in the Vatican suggests that their custodians recognized the potential significance of such knowledge and sought to ensure its survival, even as broader access was restricted. Engagement with these texts raises profound questions. Could certain remedies preserve compounds or processes now lost to modern science? Do the symbolic frameworks conceal insights into natural laws, planetary cycles, or human physiology that were deliberately obscured? And to what extent were these manuscripts meant to instruct the lay practitioner versus serving as guides for an esoteric elite, trained in reading the symbols and interpreting the diagrams correctly? The uncertainty surrounding their intended audience and purpose contributes to the aura of mystery. making the herbals more than historical documents. They are enigmas that straddle the boundary between science, art, and spiritual practice. As one turns the pages of these herbals, the reader encounters a careful balance between observation and imagination, empirical detail and encoded knowledge. Each leaf is a convergence of multiple traditions, the practical and the mystical, the medicinal and the philosophical, the observable and the symbolic. The manuscripts remind us that knowledge was rarely conceived as compartmentalized. Rather, it was holistic, with the treatment of the body inseparable from understanding the cosmos and the ethical life of the practitioner. These texts are silent witnesses to a worldview that modern scholarship has only partially grasped, and they offer tantalizing evidence that ancient peoples possessed a more integrated understanding of nature and human health than is often acknowledged. Ultimately, the Vatican herbals and medical manuscripts preserve more than botanical or pharmacological knowledge. They embody a way of seeing the world in which human life, the natural world, and the celestial sphere were interconnected. They ask the modern reader to pause, observe, and consider the layers of meaning encoded within their pages, and to recognize that what has survived, what was considered worthy of preservation, is only a fragment of a far richer intellectual tradition. In their quiet, guarded way, these manuscripts testify to centuries of observation, experimentation, and spiritual reflection, offering insight into a dimension of human understanding that continues to elude full comprehension. Chapter 13. Vatican manuscript on antediluvian kings hidden among the labyrinthine shelves of the Vatican Library. There exists a manuscript that few scholars have ever seen in its entirety. Its pages are brittle, the ink faded with centuries, yet the text within pulses with echoes of worlds long vanished. Known simply as the Vatican manuscript on antediluvian kings, it recounts rulers, dynasties, and civilizations that, according to its content, predate the accepted timelines of human history. These accounts are interwoven with descriptions of cataclysmic floods, celestial alignments, and astronomical phenomena that suggest a level of observation far beyond what is typically attributed to ancient societies. The manuscript's narrative is neither wholly historical nor entirely mythic. It occupies a liminal space where memory, legend, and cosmology converge, offering glimpses into a past that mainstream scholarship has largely ignored. The text opens with lists of kings whose reigns supposedly stretch back into an age before written records elsewhere. Rulers whose names appear strange to modern tongues, yet recur in patterns across multiple sections. Each name is accompanied by symbolic notation, stars, geometric markers, or cryptic annotations that hint at more than mere chronology. Some scholars posit that these markings encode celestial events or cyclical phenomena, perhaps intended to connect human rulership with the rhythms of the heavens. The manuscript repeatedly emphasizes the interconnection of cosmic order and earthly governance, suggesting that the cycles of the sun, moon, and planets were inseparable from the legitimacy and wisdom of these antediluvian rulers. Interlaced with these king lists are narratives of great floods, storms and fires, events described with meticulous attention to astronomical detail. The manuscript does not merely tell of rising waters. It associates inundations with planetary conjunctions, solar eclipses, and meteorological phenomena, as though the chroniclers sought to map catastrophic cycles with a precision that mirrors later observations of precession and calendrical calculations. Here, myth and empirical observation are inseparable, presenting a vision of history that is both poetic and disturbingly exact. Some historians have suggested that these passages preserve a fragmentary memory of civilizations that may have existed before what is conventionally considered the dawn of history, their knowledge lost in the upheavals of successive cataclysms. The manuscript's treatment of time is particularly unusual. Chronologies are extended, sometimes impossibly long by modern standards, yet they follow internal logic that suggests a different conception of history than that adopted by classical or biblical tradition. Generational spans are exaggerated, lifespans linked to celestial cycles, and events are synchronized with planetary movements rather than simple sequential years. These details provoke questions about the understanding of time held by the manuscript's compilers. Were they attempting to reconcile oral traditions with astronomical observation, or might the exaggeration reflect an intentional obfuscation, designed to encode knowledge in a symbolic form, accessible only to those trained in a hidden interpretive system? Throughout the manuscript, recurring motifs emphasize the fragility and resilience of human civilizations. Floods sweep across kingdoms, fire consumes cities, and entire dynasties vanish, only to be followed by the rise of new rulers who often bear echoes of their predecessors. This cyclical vision aligns with comparative mythologies found in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and even the Indus Valley, where recurring cataclysms are remembered as formative events in collective memory. The Vatican manuscript's emphasis on cyclical catastrophe raises profound questions. Are these stories mythic exaggerations, allegorical reflections of societal collapse, or literal memory of events that were deliberately erased from mainstream historical consciousness? The manuscript also contains passages that are notably cryptic, with words scratched out, lines overwritten, or marginalia obscured by later edits. Scholars analyzing these anomalies have speculated that some content may have been deliberately concealed, whether due to its dangerous philosophical implications, its challenge to established religious doctrine, or simply to preserve the secrecy of knowledge deemed esoteric. Certain annotations appear to be keyed to numerical sequences or astronomical observations, as though they contain instructions for interpreting the text beyond its literal words. In this sense, the manuscript functions not just as a historical account, but as a coded archive, where truth is layered beneath narrative, metaphor, and symbol. Equally striking is the manuscript's cosmological framing. The heavens are not merely background, they are active agents influencing human affairs. Kings rise and fall in concert with solar and lunar cycles. Comets are interpreted as omens or markers of dynastic change. And eclipses are described with technical precision, suggesting that the compilers had knowledge of celestial patterns not widely recognized until centuries later. These integrations of astronomical observation with historical record imply a worldview in which celestial phenomena were intimately tied to human destiny, a perspective that resonates with other ancient systems, from Babylonian ephemerides to Egyptian temple alignments. Yet despite the manuscript's sophistication, significant gaps remain. Entire sections are missing, leaving abrupt transitions between dynasties or events, while some pages bear signs of erasure, as if knowledge had been deliberately scrubbed from the record. This incompleteness contributes to its aura of mystery. Readers are left to speculate on the knowledge that once existed and on the motives for its partial disappearance. Was the text curated to preserve only acceptable knowledge? Was it considered too dangerous to allow complete access? The Vatican's continued custody of the manuscript and its restricted access adds another layer of intrigue, suggesting that those in authority recognized both its value and its potential to destabilize established historical or theological narratives. The manuscript's interplay of legend and possible historical memory challenges the boundaries between scholarship and speculation. Names of kings and kingdoms recur in surprising contexts, sometimes aligning with geographical regions known from archaeology, sometimes existing only in the text's internal cosmology. Flood accounts resemble Mesopotamian epics, such as the Atrahasis or the Gilgamesh flood narrative, yet differ in scale, detail, and chronology, hinting at independent sources or a shared memory of global cataclysm. Scholars have speculated that the text may preserve fragments of oral traditions transmitted across millennia, later codified by scribes who sought to encode history within the frameworks of astrology and ritualized kingship. Perhaps most compelling is the sense that the manuscript was intended as both instruction and warning. The cyclical rise and fall of civilizations, tied to celestial forces, suggests a meditation on human vulnerability and resilience. Kings are not immortal, nor are empires permanent. The text repeatedly emphasizes the impermanence of power and the enduring influence of cosmic order. Such perspectives may have been intended to guide rulers, priests, or scholars in understanding their place within larger cycles, or perhaps to ensure that the lessons of antediluvian history were not entirely forgotten. In engaging with the Vatican manuscript on antediluvian kings, one confronts the profound tension between memory and erasure, knowledge and secrecy. It offers tantalizing glimpses of civilizations that may have existed before what is recognized in canonical history, entwining the fates of kings with celestial mechanics and cosmic cycles. The manuscript raises questions that are simultaneously historical, mythological, and philosophical. To what extent did pre-flood civilizations possess sophisticated understanding of astronomy, governance, and natural law? How much of their knowledge survived cultural catastrophes, only to be preserved, partially hidden, within the Vatican's archives? And what truths, deliberately concealed or lost to time, continue to resonate through these fragile pages? In its quiet, cryptic manner, the manuscript embodies the enduring mystery of human memory itself. Civilizations rise and fall. Knowledge is recorded and erased, and fragments survive to be glimpsed by those willing to explore the margins of accepted history. Each page, each notation, each obscure king's name is a reminder that the past is not linear but layered, and that the Vatican holds within its walls a silent witness to the civilizations that preceded our own understanding of time and history. The manuscript does not yield definitive answers. It invites reflection, careful study, and a recognition of the vast expanse of human experience that lies beyond the reach of conventional chronologies. Chapter 14, Codex Vaticanus, Latinus, 5750, Mathematical Anomalies. Among the vast and shadowed corridors of the Vatican Library, the Codex Vaticanus Latinus, 5750, rests in near-total seclusion. Its pages a testament to both human ingenuity and deliberate concealment. This Latin manuscript, fragile yet meticulously preserved, contains sequences of numbers, intricate geometric diagrams, and schematic notations that confound historians and mathematicians alike. At first glance, the Codex might seem to be a collection of abstract calculations, exercises in arithmetic or ornamental geometry, yet closer study reveals patterns that are neither random nor merely decorative. They suggest a system of knowledge far advanced for the time, and, in some ways, startlingly sophisticated, predating the recognized European mathematical achievements of the medieval period by centuries. The sequences within the Codex are striking for their complexity. Numerical arrays appear alongside interlocking circles, triangles, and polygons, arranged with precision that implies careful observation of underlying principles. Scholars have noted that certain arrangements correspond to planetary cycles, precession of the equinoxes, and even obscure astronomical intervals not widely recognized until much later. These associations suggest that the Codex may encode more than simple mathematics. It could be a repository of cosmological knowledge, a system in which number, form, and celestial observation intersect. The diagrams hint at a worldview in which mathematics and the cosmos are inseparable, an understanding of order both terrestrial and heavenly, encoded for careful study by those trained to decipher it. Annotations within the Codex further complicate its interpretation. Marginal notes, often written in a smaller, cramped script, sometimes overlay the geometric diagrams, while others have been partially erased or overwritten. These additions imply a layered approach to knowledge. Some portions were meant to be fully visible, instructive, or perhaps pedagogical, while others were intentionally hidden, accessible only to those with the proper key or understanding. The Codex thus functions as both an instructional text and a cryptic archive, simultaneously revealing and concealing, inviting careful attention and discernment. This duality raises questions about the motivations behind its preservation. Was the Codex a teaching tool for an elite scholarly circle, or a repository of dangerous knowledge, guarded from broader scrutiny to maintain social, political, or religious hierarchies? The content of the manuscript also evokes comparisons with esoteric numerological traditions. Certain numerical sequences align with symbolic correspondences, reminiscent of Pythagorean, Hermetic, or later Kabbalistic frameworks. Numbers are not merely counts or measurements. They signify relationships, harmonies, and potentially hidden cosmic truths. Geometric constructions often accompany these sequences, suggesting that the Codex's compilers considered spatial and numerical forms as intertwined manifestations of order. In this way, mathematics becomes more than a tool for measurement. It emerges as a language through which the ancients may have sought to describe the fundamental structures of reality itself. Some of the diagrams appear to encode astronomical knowledge in ways that remain mysterious. Triangular arrangements, concentric circles, and intersecting polygons correspond, in several instances, with cycles of planets, lunar phases, or solar alignments. The precision is remarkable, implying careful observation and calculation. Yet, unlike later astronomical tables, these sequences are woven with symbolic and numerical elements that suggest secrecy, a deliberate obscuring of their full meaning. Modern computational analyses have attempted to decode these patterns, revealing correlations with long-period cycles and intervals not widely known in medieval Europe. The suggestion arises that the Codex preserves knowledge of celestial phenomena from a period far earlier than conventional histories acknowledge, a relic of a tradition that may have survived cataclysms, lost civilizations, or cultural suppression. The physical structure of the manuscript reinforces its aura of enigma. Pages are densely inscribed, with minimal space for interpretation. Yet margins and interlinear spaces often include stray calculations, coded symbols, or shorthand notations that resist simple translation. Ink coloration varies subtly in some diagrams, perhaps to indicate significance or layers of meaning. Faint erasures or palimpsest-like markings imply that sections of the text were edited, removed, or intentionally obscured, suggesting that the Codex's custodians were conscious of the potential impact of the knowledge it contained. These material aspects of the manuscript, the careful precision of diagrams, the layering of annotations, and the deliberate obfuscation, reveal a text designed to communicate on multiple levels, some accessible only to the learned few. The manuscript's origins remain debated. Some researchers propose links to Alexandrian scholars or lost Mediterranean traditions, suggesting that the Codex represents a fragment of a broader intellectual heritage, suppressed or forgotten after successive societal collapses. Its mathematical and astronomical sophistication implies sources far earlier than medieval Latin scholarship. Comparisons with Babylonian and Egyptian computational methods reveal tantalizing parallels, though the Codex's methods are often more advanced, particularly in their integration of geometry, numerology, and cyclical observation. This raises the question of whether certain mathematical and cosmological principles were deliberately transmitted in encoded form to preserve them across centuries, shielded from the wider currents of history that might have neglected, misunderstood, or suppressed them. Beyond its historical and technical significance, the Codex embodies a philosophical message. Numbers, shapes, and cycles are not merely tools. They are reflections of order, law, and pattern that connect the terrestrial and the celestial. The manuscript implicitly suggests that the universe itself is intelligible to those who possess the skill to read it, that hidden harmonies govern both human life and cosmic motion. The repeated layering of information, visible, hidden, and coded, may reflect a worldview in which knowledge is sacred and potentially dangerous, to be revealed only to those trained to respect its power and complexity. This approach resonates with broader traditions in esoteric thought, where wisdom is shared gradually, often through symbolic or cryptic forms, and where secrecy is considered essential to its preservation. Engaging with Codex Vaticanus Latinus 5750, one becomes aware of its dual nature. It is at once a technical artifact, a record of numerical and geometric insight, and a philosophical treatise encoding a vision of reality in which number, form, and the heavens are inseparable. The manuscript invites contemplation of both the intellectual capabilities of ancient scholars and the broader cultural forces that might have motivated the concealment of such knowledge. Was it considered too advanced, too dangerous, or too destabilizing for general dissemination? And to what extent might similar codices once have existed, now lost or deliberately destroyed, leaving only fragments to hint at the scope of ancient understanding? As we trace the sequences, the diagrams, and the cryptic annotations, we are left with a profound sense of continuity and loss. Continuity of knowledge carefully transmitted across generations, and loss of comprehension that grows with every century. The manuscript stands as a silent testament to the fact that the history of mathematics and astronomy may be far deeper, richer, and more enigmatic than standard accounts suggest. It hints at a past in which human intellect, observation, and symbolism were interwoven into an integrated understanding of nature, a past in which the lines between science, philosophy, and spirituality were fluid, and a past in which knowledge was both precious and perilous. Ultimately, Codex Vaticanus Latinus 5750 is more than a record of numbers and diagrams. It is a dialogue across time, a conversation with minds long vanished, whose insights survive only in fragmented, coded form. It challenges modern assumptions about the origins and limits of mathematical and astronomical knowledge, suggesting that what we recognize as achievement may be but a small fraction of what earlier civilizations once knew and carefully guarded. Each page, each line, each subtle annotation whispers of a hidden intellectual tradition, waiting for those willing to read between the lines, decode the symbols, and consider the extraordinary sophistication of human thought long before it entered the canonical history of Europe. Chapter 15. The Vatican Necrologies, amid the silent corridors of the Vatican Library, amidst the careful order of vellum, parchment, and ink, lie registers that at first appear mundane, lists of deaths, lineages and succession, seemingly ordinary in form and purpose. Yet these ancient necrologies are anything but simple. Within their meticulously maintained pages are anomalies that defy expectation. Rulers whose lifespans stretch impossibly long by conventional historical standards, obscure societies whose existence is mentioned in passing, but finds no corroboration elsewhere, and sudden, unexplained gaps corresponding to cataclysmic events that have left little trace in the accepted historical record. The necrologies themselves form a lattice of memory, where fact, myth, and deliberate omission intermingle, offering subtle hints of a past deliberately curated, hidden within the archive's careful confines. The compilers of these records appear to have approached death and memory with profound reverence. Names are aligned with dates, but the structure is more complex than a mere register. Interlinear notations suggest affiliations, territorial claims, and sometimes even allegiances to mysterious societies whose practices remain obscure. Some of these groups are noted only once, their mention almost incidental. Yet when cross-referenced with other manuscripts, chronicles, codices, or letters, they reveal inconsistencies, rulers appearing simultaneously in geographically distant regions, events overlapping impossibly, or dynasties persisting far longer than mainstream history allows. Scholars have long debated whether these anomalies are errors, legendary exaggerations, or deliberate encryptions designed to conceal knowledge from ordinary scrutiny. The necrologies do not merely record mortality, they encode cycles of authority, linking dynasties to cosmic or environmental phenomena. Recurrent motifs hint that the compilers were attentive to patterns, perhaps reflecting a worldview in which celestial alignments, natural disasters, and the lives of rulers were deeply interconnected. Some entries describe sudden disappearances of entire families or communities, events attributed vaguely to divine judgment or catastrophic calamity, often with no additional context. Such records provoke questions about historical continuity. Were these omissions the result of selective memory, a deliberate shaping of narrative, or do they hint at civilizations lost to natural or human-induced catastrophe, preserved only in these quiet lists of names and dates? Physical examination of the necrologies adds another layer of intrigue. The manuscripts vary in age, some dating back to the early medieval period, others to the late antique era, with corrections and marginal notes layered across generations. Faint erasures suggest that certain entries were removed or obscured, perhaps to maintain secrecy or protect particular knowledge. Unusual ink patterns indicate multiple scribes, sometimes working across decades, perhaps even centuries, raising the possibility of evolving interpretations and revisions over time. These physical details convey not just information, but intention. The necrologies were maintained, curated, and perhaps even manipulated to guide memory in specific ways, selectively preserving certain lineages while leaving others enigmatic or erased entirely. The content of the necrologies also suggests a deep interest in longevity and the measurement of time. Several rulers are recorded as living far beyond normal human lifespans, their reigns stretching across decades that seem implausible by any conventional standard. These extended lifespans are sometimes linked to astronomical events or cycles, indicating that longevity might have been considered a reflection of cosmic favor or alignment, rather than mere biology. Could these accounts hint at knowledge of ancient practices now lost? Or are they symbolic reflections of dynastic authority, intended to convey power and legitimacy through mythic exaggeration? Patterns of catastrophe recur throughout the necrologies. Plagues, floods, and fires are noted with brevity, often devoid of explanatory context. Cross-referencing these events with other historical sources reveals inconsistencies. Certain disasters appear in multiple regions simultaneously, yet leave no physical traces archaeologically. Some scholars have speculated that these anomalies point to suppressed history, records of events that authorities deemed dangerous to fully acknowledge, perhaps because they contradicted prevailing narratives of divine providence, political stability, or social continuity. The necrologies thus emerge not simply as records of death, but as documents of memory and erasure, tracing the boundaries between what was remembered and what was intentionally hidden. The Vatican's curation of these texts reinforces their significance. Access has historically been limited, with only select scholars permitted to study the registers under strict supervision. This restricted availability has fueled speculation that the necrologies were regarded as containing knowledge too sensitive or destabilizing for general consumption. Were they maintained to protect institutional authority, to preserve fragments of pre-flood history, or to encode esoteric wisdom regarding the interplay of human events and cosmic cycles? The manuscript's very seclusion suggests that its custodians recognize both its value and its potential to disrupt conventional understanding of chronology, power, and civilization. In examining these necrologies, one also notes the subtle interplay of narrative and omission. Entire lineages vanish from one entry to the next, or reappear centuries later with minimal explanation. Occasional annotations hint at knowledge transmitted orally, perhaps from traditions predating Roman, Etruscan, or early Christian chronologies. Some entries appear to preserve fragmentary memory of lost societies, their achievements, catastrophes, and rulers only faintly remembered. The registers are thus not purely administrative. They are repositories of layered memory, holding in their quiet columns the echo of civilizations partially erased by time, politics, or cataclysm. Interestingly, the necrologies occasionally reference symbolic or allegorical relationships. Certain families are aligned with celestial events or ritual cycles, implying a worldview in which lineage, governance, and cosmic order were inseparable. The repetition of such patterns suggests intentional encoding, perhaps designed to instruct future generations in observing temporal cycles, interpreting omens, or maintaining continuity of knowledge. In this way, the necrologies act as both a record of mortality and a guide to understanding the rhythms of history, linking human events with celestial and natural forces. The anomalies within the necrologies challenge modern assumptions about history. They provoke reflection on the nature of memory itself, what is preserved, what is altered, and what is allowed to disappear. The long-lived rulers, enigmatic societies, and unexplained catastrophes imply a past far more intricate than standard narratives suggest, one in which the boundaries between myth, history, and cosmic order blur. Each carefully inscribed name, each faded date, and each marginal note whispers of human attempts to reconcile mortality, memory, and the unfolding patterns of civilizations. As we trace the threads within these necrologies, a subtle, almost spectral picture of the past emerges. Civilizations whose memory survives only in fragments, rulers whose reigns may be more symbolic than literal, and societies whose traces are almost entirely absent except for fleeting mentions. The manuscripts suggest that history is not linear, but layered, that memory is curated, and that what survives may be as much a product of intentional selection as of chance preservation. In the quiet presence of these pages, one is made acutely aware of the fragility of human record and the power inherent in controlling it. The necrologies hint at forgotten civilizations, suppressed events, and cosmic alignments now lost to conventional study. They stand as both tools for historical reconstruction and reminders of how easily knowledge can be shaped, hidden, or erased. Each entry, each anomaly, each subtle pattern invites reflection on the fragility of continuity, the deliberate shaping of collective memory, and the mysteries that remain inaccessible except to those willing to look beyond surface appearances. The Vatican necrologies, in their silent rigor, challenge us to reconsider what we know about time, life, and history. They are more than registers of death. They are repositories of human memory, encoded with enigmas that bridge the mundane and the extraordinary, the mortal and the cosmic. In their careful preservation lies the whisper of a forgotten past, and the suggestion that the boundaries of historical knowledge are neither fixed nor fully accessible, but layered, selective, and enigmatic. Chapter 16, Codex Vaticanus, Tram 75, Voynich Parallels. Within the vaulted depths of the Vatican Library, among the countless manuscripts that have survived the ravages of time, rests a text that evokes the same mystery and intrigue as the famed Voynich manuscript, yet remains far less known. Codex Vaticanus 575. Its pages, fragile and yellowed with centuries, are densely inscribed with an undeciphered script that flows in meticulous, looping characters. Unlike familiar medieval scripts, the letters resist classification, appearing neither Latin nor Greek, neither Coptic nor Arabic, yet echoing with a rhythm that suggests intentional structure. For centuries, scholars have approached the Codex with a mixture of awe and frustration, compelled by its strange beauty and bewildered by its unintelligibility. Each line seems to conceal knowledge beyond ordinary comprehension, a secret deliberately encoded to survive the ages without revealing its purpose outright. Interspersed among these enigmatic texts are botanical illustrations that defy easy identification. The plants depicted are often unrecognizable, their leaves, flowers, and roots arranged with precise, almost obsessive detail. Some specimens resemble known species, yet are subtly altered in ways that challenge classification. A leaf split at an impossible angle, a flower petal that curves in a geometric precision, a root system that defies natural growth patterns. These images are not mere decoration. They suggest a sophisticated understanding of morphology, perhaps even of medicinal or ritual properties, encoded in a visual language that complements the indecipherable text. Scholars have long speculated that the Codex preserves knowledge from civilizations whose memory was all but erased, fragments of pre-flood herbal traditions or esoteric botanical systems that once linked humans intimately with the natural world. The structure of Codex 575 hints at purpose beyond simple record-keeping. Sections appear organized according to categories: herbs, astronomical symbols, and schematic diagrams. But the logic remains opaque. Marginal annotations, often in the same undeciphered script, suggest cross-references, corrections, or symbolic cues. Some pages contain circular diagrams reminiscent of early cosmological charts, intersecting with plant illustrations in ways that hint at ritualistic or philosophical significance. Could these diagrams represent cycles of growth aligned with celestial patterns? Or were they tools for encoding a system of knowledge where natural, cosmic, and spiritual realms converge? The answers remain tantalizingly out of reach. The very composition of the manuscript implies painstaking labor over generations. Subtle variations in ink, line thickness, and page preparation suggest multiple hands at work, revising, refining, and perpetuating the knowledge within. In some cases, the parchment shows erasures and overwrites, faint traces of earlier attempts at recording or correcting the content. This layering conveys a deliberate intent to preserve while simultaneously obscuring a pattern echoed in other Vatican texts. It is as though the creators anticipated future scrutiny, yet sought to control the perception of their knowledge, allowing the Codex to survive without revealing its full meaning. Some scholars propose that Codex 575 may encode advanced knowledge, far exceeding the herbal lore of its era. The precise botanical illustrations, combined with diagrams suggesting fluid dynamics, astronomical alignments, and geometric patterns, point toward a system where natural science, mysticism, and philosophy intersect. Was this knowledge practical, guiding the preparation of medicines, or symbolic, a framework for understanding the cosmos and the human role within it? The possibility that the Codex preserves a lost scientific or spiritual system has led to speculation that it was gathered and hidden in the Vatican deliberately, a repository of wisdom too powerful, too arcane, or too heretical for broader dissemination. Its parallels with the Voynich manuscript deepen the intrigue. Both texts resist decryption, both combine botanical illustrations with mysterious script, and both imply a depth of knowledge unattainable by contemporaneous scholars. Yet Codex 575 appears older in style and execution, its vellum and ink suggesting roots in an earlier European or Mediterranean tradition, perhaps connected to esoteric practices circulating in the late antique world. Some researchers suggest links to Alexandria, a city that once served as a crossroads of science, philosophy, and mystical inquiry. Others consider the possibility that the Codex draws upon memory inherited from vanished civilizations, knowledge of plants, minerals, and cosmology that predates even known Greek or Roman scholarship. The Vatican's custodianship of Codex 575 further underscores its perceived importance. Restricted from general access, studied only by select scholars under close supervision, the manuscript is treated as a treasure and a threat in equal measure. The secrecy surrounding it invites speculation. Was the Codex preserved as an artifact of historical curiosity, as a repository of forbidden knowledge, or as a map to technologies and spiritual practices deliberately removed from the public sphere. Its survival, despite centuries of religious upheaval, wars, and cultural transformation, suggests that its contents were considered valuable, potentially dangerous, and worth the careful attention of those charged with its care. Beyond its script and illustrations, the Codex conveys a sense of rhythm and pattern that hints at intentional encoding. Certain sequences of characters recur at regular intervals, mirroring the repetition of botanical features or geometric arrangements. Some have suggested that these repetitions reflect a numerological or calendrical system, mapping plant cycles, celestial events, or even philosophical concepts onto a symbolic language. Others propose that the patterns are mnemonic, designed to aid practitioners in recalling complex procedures, whether herbal, ritualistic, or alchemical. Yet, despite decades of analysis, the underlying logic eludes definitive interpretation, leaving each observation suspended between discovery and mystery. The manuscript's botanical section, in particular, suggests an empirical sensibility intertwined with esoteric thought. Leaves and flowers are drawn with precision, sometimes accompanied by minute symbols, lines or dots indicating proportions, orientation, or even energetic qualities. Some plants are depicted in idealized form, as if illustrating not their earthly reality, but their archetypal essence, a reflection of a worldview in which natural forms, spiritual forces, and human understanding are inseparable. Could these illustrations preserve a system of knowledge connecting herbology, cosmic cycles, and spiritual insight? If so, the Codex represents not mere botanical cataloguing, but an integrated science of life and cosmos lost to subsequent generations. Even the Codex's undeciphered language conveys subtle meaning. The spacing, repetition, and line arrangement suggest a structured grammar, possibly one designed to encode multiple layers of information. Some researchers have hypothesized that the script functions simultaneously as phonetic representation, symbolic code, and mnemonic device. The margins, filled with small glyphs and abstract diagrams, reinforce the impression of a multi-layered system of knowledge, where the surface narrative conceals deeper truths accessible only to the initiated. It is a language of concealment as much as communication, preserving knowledge while shielding it from casual interpretation. Codex Vaticanus 575, in its entirety, offers a meditation on the fragility of knowledge and the persistence of secrecy. Its pages survive as a testament to human curiosity and ingenuity, yet also as a reminder of the limits imposed by culture, power, and time. Each leaf, each glyph, each meticulously drawn plant invites reflection on civilizations whose wisdom has partially vanished, whose understanding of nature, cosmology, and medicine might have exceeded what was later deemed acceptable or comprehensible. Its presence within the Vatican, carefully guarded, rarely accessed, quietly enduring, signals recognition of a knowledge that is at once invaluable and unsettling, a bridge between eras, disciplines, and lost worlds. To study Codex 575 is to confront the possibility of knowledge deliberately hidden, the echoes of civilizations erased or transformed, and the enduring human impulse to understand and preserve what might otherwise be forgotten. It stands as a symbol of the intersection between science and mysticism, observation and secrecy, survival and erasure. In these pages, the boundaries of the known and unknown, the visible and concealed converge, leaving us with questions that continue to haunt scholars, botanists, and historians alike. What ancient wisdom lies encoded in the undeciphered lines? And why was it deemed necessary to guard it for centuries within the silent sacred walls of the Vatican? Chapter 17. Vatican Scrolls on Flood Legends deep within the labyrinthine halls of the Vatican archives. Where the air hangs thick with the weight of centuries, there exist scrolls whose faded fibers whisper of water, deluge, and the violent cycles of the earth. These are the Vatican Scrolls on Flood Legends, a collection of manuscripts that recount catastrophic inundations across lands and civilizations, many of them predating or diverging sharply from the biblical account of Noah. Their surfaces are worn, yet the ink endures, hinting at stories of lost cities swallowed by waves, of rulers and peoples vanished beneath the relentless sweep of water, and of celestial omens observed in the skies above before the waters came. The narratives contained within these scrolls are neither uniform nor linear. In one, the flood rises from the mountains of Mesopotamia, sweeping across river valleys that would centuries later host Sumerian cities. In another, it descends upon lands along the Indus or the Nile, suggesting an awareness of cataclysmic events far beyond a single cultural memory. Chronologies shift and overlap. Kings reign for implausible centuries. Generations pass in ways that strain conventional timelines. Scholars who have studied these documents note patterns of repetition and divergence that hint at independent oral traditions codified in writing, a mosaic of human remembrance grappling with the trauma of immense recurring disasters. Were these floods historical events, mythologized over generations, or encoded allegories of deeper natural and celestial cycles, carefully preserved in anticipation of future calamities? The scrolls themselves are physical artifacts of extraordinary antiquity. Their papyrus is fragile, yet resilient, displaying fibers that suggest provenance in different regions and climates. Ink layers reveal corrections and annotations, often in the margins or between lines, as if scribes felt compelled to preserve multiple versions of a story, or to note astronomical or seasonal correspondences alongside narrative passages. Some of these annotations are cryptic, employing symbols and shorthand that remain only partially understood. Modern imaging has revealed faint traces of prior text beneath later writing, evidence of deliberate erasure and rewriting, a palimpsest of memory layered across generations. This act of preserving while concealing suggests a consciousness that these stories held knowledge too potent, or too unsettling to allow their full meaning to circulate freely. Within these scrolls, there is an unmistakable interplay of the terrestrial and the celestial. Descriptions of storms, rising rivers, and tidal waves are frequently accompanied by references to comets, planetary alignments, or unusual solar phenomena. In some sections, the water itself seems to respond to celestial patterns, rising and receding according to cycles of the heavens. Scholars have speculated that such correspondences hint at an ancient understanding of the connection between astronomical events and earthly catastrophes, a kind of proto-science encoded in narrative form. The flood becomes both literal and symbolic, a marker of cosmic order and chaos, a tool to convey knowledge across generations without revealing all its mechanisms. What makes these scrolls particularly remarkable is the breadth of geographic memory they preserve. Whereas many ancient texts recount local or regional disasters, the Vatican's flood scrolls span continents and cultures. References to lands and peoples long erased from historical memory are scattered throughout, often accompanied by detailed environmental descriptions. Fertile plains transformed into marshlands, mountain valleys carved into new rivers, coastlines redefined by sudden inundation. Some passages hint at lost civilizations, structures of stone and clay that succumbed to water and time, echoing with the faint suggestion that human memory itself may be a fragile, selective record. The scroll's custodianship within the Vatican implies an awareness of their potential implications. To house narratives that challenge established chronology, that hint at advanced or forgotten civilizations, or that recall pre-flood knowledge, is to acknowledge a history that might destabilize accepted frameworks. The very act of preserving such documents, rather than suppressing them entirely, suggests reverence and caution. Here are stories that were too vital to destroy, yet too disruptive to be widely disseminated. They exist in liminal space, at the intersection of myth, history, and speculative memory, a repository of warnings, observations, and human attempts to understand the cycles of destruction that have shaped the earth. The scrolls often contain lists of rulers, peoples, and cities, some of which do not appear in conventional historical records. Generations are measured not in decades, but in centuries, and events are recorded with a precision that belies their seeming mythic qualities. Scholars have debated whether these are exaggerations, symbolic constructs, or fragments of genuine accounts from antediluvian societies. In certain passages, astronomical observations accompany the narrative of flooding, unusual solar eclipses, comets streaking across night skies, or stars appearing out of sequence. The implication is clear. The ancients were not only chronicling human events, but situating them within a cosmic framework, suggesting a continuity of observation and understanding that spans civilizations lost to time. It is impossible to ignore the parallels between these scrolls and flood myths found around the globe. Sumerian tales of Ziusudra, Babylonian accounts of Utnapishtim, Indian narratives of Manu, and even pre-Columbian traditions speak of cataclysms that reshaped the world. While some scholars attribute these similarities to archetypal storytelling, The Vatican scrolls' independent variations hint at a more complex reality. Multiple cultures recording the same fundamental events, interpreted through local contexts, yet pointing to a shared human memory of global inundations. The very existence of these scrolls raises profound questions. What was remembered? What was forgotten? And what knowledge was encoded in story form for survival across millennia? Equally compelling are the subtle philosophical elements embedded in the texts. The flood is not always merely punishment. It is transformation, a cyclical cleansing, a recalibration of human society in accordance with divine or natural laws. Certain passages discuss human behavior, ritual observances, and moral considerations, linking societal harmony with survival. Other sections focus on astronomical and environmental data, cataloguing rainfall, river swellings, and celestial patterns with meticulous detail. This duality, the moral and the practical, the narrative and the empirical, suggests a sophisticated worldview in which human experience, environmental observation, and cosmic order are inseparable. The scroll's materiality also offers insight into their significance. Many bear seals or marks that suggest careful cataloguing, indicating that the texts were considered valuable enough to warrant organized preservation. Differences in ink, handwriting, and parchment types reveal a long history of transcription and compilation, possibly across centuries and locations. These factors, combined with the inclusion of celestial and geographical information, underscore the codices' role as repositories of knowledge, a living record continually updated, curated, and protected against loss or corruption. In the silence of the Vatican's restricted rooms, the flood scrolls exist as quiet witnesses to humanity's recurring vulnerability. They ask us to consider not only the events they record, but the nature of memory itself. What is preserved, what is deliberately overwritten, and what disappears entirely. They challenge conventional timelines, inviting reflection on civilizations that may have risen and fallen long before recorded history, and on knowledge that has survived through careful concealment. Each scroll is a fragment of a broader, unfinished narrative, a testament to human curiosity and resilience in the face of forces beyond comprehension. The Vatican scrolls on flood legends are more than mere curiosities. They are portals into the minds of those who sought to understand the patterns of destruction and survival, to encode lessons from antiquity, and to reconcile human history with the movements of the heavens. They compel us to ask whether myth is memory disguised, whether narrative preserves events that empirical records cannot, and whether the custodians of this knowledge understood the profound consequences of its existence. Within these fragile fibers lies a meditation on the impermanence of civilization, the persistence of knowledge, and the subtle interplay of secrecy and revelation that has allowed humanity to glimpse, however faintly, the lost worlds of our distant past. Chapter 18, Codex Vaticanus, 1611, Lost Civilizations. Within the hushed, echoing halls of the Vatican archives lies a manuscript whose existence alone provokes both fascination and unease. Known to scholars by its catalogue number, Codex Vaticanus 1611, it is a document that charts worlds unseen by classical historians, civilizations whose names are absent from the annals of Rome, Greece, and Egypt. The parchment is fragile, yet remarkably well preserved, its edges worn by centuries of careful handling, its ink retaining a quiet darkness that seems almost to pulse with the stories inscribed upon it. Here, in the careful strokes of long-dead scribes, lie accounts of cities and peoples that do not appear in conventional historical texts, civilizations whose sophistication, technological, cultural, and architectural defies the timeline of known human achievement. The Codex opens with descriptions of settlements whose foundations suggest knowledge, of urban planning far earlier than any conventional chronology would allow. Streets are described as aligned with celestial points, plazas designed to capture light at solstices and equinoxes, and structures built with materials and techniques that challenge modern assumptions about ancient engineering. Towers and temples, often of stone hewn with geometric precision, suggest both practical mastery and symbolic purpose, linking architecture with cosmology. Archaeologists who have compared these accounts to later discoveries in regions like Mesoamerica, the Indus Valley, and even remote areas of the Andes have noted uncanny parallels. Cities revealed through excavation that mirror the Codex's descriptions with remarkable fidelity. How could a manuscript hidden for centuries contain knowledge that corresponds so closely to structures only recently unearthed? The manuscript's cultural observations are equally compelling. It details social hierarchies, trade networks, religious practices, and artistic conventions of peoples otherwise lost to history. Festivals aligned with astronomical events, rituals invoking both celestial and terrestrial forces, and depictions of artisans working with metals, ceramics, and unknown alloys suggest societies of immense sophistication. Some of these cultures appear to have harnessed natural resources in ways that anticipate techniques we consider modern. Metallurgy, with unexpectedly advanced alloys, hydraulic systems for irrigation and public works, and astronomical observatories embedded within civic centers. Yet none of these civilizations left behind inscriptions recognizable in classical records, except, perhaps in fragments later incorporated into mythology, allegory, or selectively preserved chronicles. A particularly striking aspect of Codex 1611 is its treatment of memory and history. The manuscript is not a straightforward chronicle. It blends empirical description with allegorical narrative. Stories of kings, scholars, and artisans are interwoven with accounts of floods, celestial omens, and cataclysmic events. Certain passages suggest that entire populations vanished, not merely through natural disaster, but perhaps due to wars, migrations, or deliberate obliteration. These accounts are conveyed with such specificity that scholars have debated whether they preserve the remnants of oral traditions handed down across millennia. Could the Codex be a repository of encoded memory, safeguarding knowledge from civilizations that existed before the textual traditions of Greece and Rome took hold? Material analysis of the manuscript reveals further enigmas. The inks, composed of rare mineral compounds and organic extracts, show variations across the Codex, as if multiple scribes contributed over generations, or as if revisions were undertaken to obscure certain passages. Some sections appear deliberately erased and overwritten, leaving only faint traces of the original text. Palimpsest layers that whisper of knowledge deemed too sensitive to preserve in its entirety. Scholars using multispectral imaging have uncovered partial illustrations beneath the surface, maps of rivers and mountains that do not correspond to known geography, city plans with structures unfamiliar to archaeology, and diagrams that suggest astronomical observation beyond what is considered plausible for the period. The meticulous care given to erasure and preservation suggests that the Codex was not merely a record, but a carefully curated artifact, intended to survive without fully revealing its secrets. Codex 1611 also hints at cross-cultural connections. Trade, migration, and exchange of ideas appear to have existed between these lost civilizations and early societies known from classical texts, yet the manuscript presents this in a manner that contrasts with conventional historical narratives. Artifacts described in the Codex, ceramic styles, ornamental motifs, and mechanical devices show patterns remarkably similar to findings in regions separated by vast distances. Could these civilizations have been linked by a network of knowledge and innovation erased from mainstream history? The manuscript does not provide direct answers, but it implies a complex world in which human ingenuity was more widespread, more interconnected, and more vulnerable to erasure than previously imagined. One cannot overlook the Codex's portrayal of technological and philosophical knowledge. Certain passages describe mechanisms resembling early automata, water-lifting devices, and tools whose sophistication would not be credited to ancient societies for centuries. Philosophical treatises embedded in the text reflect a nuanced understanding of human nature, ethics, and cosmology, blending practical knowledge with metaphysical speculation. This fusion of empirical and contemplative knowledge suggests civilizations that were not only advanced in material culture, but also in the frameworks by which they understood the universe. It raises the possibility that the Codex preserves remnants of wisdom deliberately hidden from later generations, perhaps to prevent the misapplication or politicization of powerful knowledge. The Vatican's stewardship of Codex 1611 amplifies its mystery. Restricted for centuries, it has been studied only by a handful of scholars permitted under strict supervision. This secrecy has fueled speculation. Was the manuscript preserved for genuine scholarly interest, or was it deliberately shielded to prevent disruption of the accepted historical narrative? The Codex's contents challenge foundational assumptions about the evolution of human civilization, and its concealment raises difficult questions about the curatorial choices made by those who held authority over the past. The manuscript exists as both a record and a cipher, revealing glimpses of lost worlds while maintaining deliberate opacity. Equally compelling are the illustrations within Codex 1611. Architectural sketches, botanical studies, and maps are executed with precision, yet many of the flora, fauna, and geographical features depicted remain unidentifiable. Certain diagrams bear resemblance to later inventions or discoveries, hinting at knowledge that may have been transmitted selectively across generations, influencing societies in ways only partially understood. The juxtaposition of imagined and empirical detail suggests a culture of observation and symbolic interpretation, one that sought to capture both the seen and the unseen, the practical and the mystical. Finally, the Codex's enduring significance lies in its invitation to question the foundations of historical memory. It compels reflection on what has been lost, overwritten, or suppressed, on the civilizations that flourished in the shadows of memory, and on the deliberate processes through which history has been shaped. By examining Codex Vaticanus 1611, we are confronted not only with the traces of unknown peoples, but with the larger mysteries of human knowledge. What can survive when power, dogma, and catastrophe intersect? How wisdom can be preserved in secrecy, and how glimpses of forgotten worlds continue to shape our understanding of the past. In the quiet of the Vatican archives, Codex 1611 rests, an artifact at once tangible and enigmatic, a bridge to civilizations unremembered, a puzzle whose pieces invite endless inquiry. Its pages challenge the limits of our historical imagination, hinting at human societies of unforeseen depth and sophistication, whose memory was selectively preserved, yet never fully revealed. Through its preservation, the Codex offers a rare glimpse into a hidden chapter of human history, a chapter that asks more questions than it answers, leaving the mind to wander across cities lost to time, technologies long forgotten, and wisdom almost erased from the collective memory of our species. Chapter 19. Vatican Map Manuscripts. Mid the dimly lit corridors of the Vatican archives, there exists a collection of maps that challenge the very foundations of historical geography. Known to few, the Vatican map manuscripts are fragile, hand-drawn representations of a world both familiar and impossible, a cartographic vision that seems to predate the accepted timeline of European exploration. Each parchment bears the faint impression of human intention, meticulous lines that delineate coastlines, rivers, and mountain ranges. Yet these features do not always correspond with known terrain. Some coastlines are now submerged beneath the oceans, and certain lands are depicted in ways that suggest either lost continents or civilizations swallowed by time and catastrophe. Scholars examining these maps have noted details that are, by conventional understanding, astonishingly precise. Measurements of longitude, often considered impossible to calculate accurately before the 18th century, appear with a level of sophistication centuries earlier. Rivers flow in patterns later confirmed by geology, and mountain ranges appear in forms that predate modern survey techniques. Yet alongside these familiar features are anomalies, islands in locations now vanished, Antarctic expanses shown without ice, coastlines suggesting pre-flood topography. The very existence of such knowledge implies a continuity of observation and record-keeping far older than the accepted narrative of cartography allows. How could these maps have been drawn with such accuracy? From what sources did their creators derive this knowledge? Some researchers propose that these manuscripts preserve remnants of lost navigational traditions, perhaps inherited from seafaring civilizations erased from classical memory. The map's composition reveals an understanding of astronomy and celestial navigation. Latitude approximated through observation of the stars, the alignment of certain coastlines with solstitial sunrise, and the careful plotting of islands along oceanic currents. There is an intentionality to the depiction, a marriage of practical navigation and symbolic representation. Certain lines and annotations hint at routes taken across vast seas, possibly connecting distant continents before they were known to European explorers. Could these maps encode memory of journeys that predate the age of discovery by millennia? Voyages undertaken by civilizations whose technological sophistication has long been forgotten. Beyond the technical precision, the Vatican map manuscripts also evoke philosophical and cosmological reflection. Some maps include notations of celestial events, eclipses, and planetary alignments, implying that the knowledge of Earth's geography was inseparable from a comprehension of the heavens. In these codices, land and sky are intertwined. Coastlines drawn with respect to stars, islands situated in alignment with constellations, and shorelines marked with symbolic indicators of seasonal change. The interplay of cartography, astronomy, and perhaps ritual suggests that these maps were not solely tools for travel, but artifacts of understanding, a means to encode memory, survival, and the relationship between human activity and cosmic cycles. Material analysis of the manuscripts further deepens their mystery. The inks vary in composition, with mineral pigments and organic compounds layered in ways that suggest multiple periods of revision. Some parchments show evidence of erasure and overwriting, as though previous knowledge was intentionally obscured while preserving enough for the initiated to decipher. Traces of erased text indicate that certain annotations, perhaps warnings, coordinates, or cultural references, were deemed too sensitive to remain visible. The care with which these maps were constructed and altered suggests a deliberate effort to safeguard knowledge, balancing the need to preserve it with the desire to conceal it from broader scrutiny. The anomalies depicted in the maps are particularly provocative. Antarctic coastlines appear without ice, hinting at a memory of the continent's pre-glacial condition, or of knowledge obtained through means unknown to conventional history. Other depictions suggest submerged landmasses in the Atlantic and Pacific, echoing mythic accounts of lost continents and civilizations described in flood legends across Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and Mesoamerican texts. The repetition of certain features across multiple maps, drawn in different centuries, indicates that the knowledge was preserved and transmitted with care, perhaps through oral traditions, copied codices, or secret navigational lineages. These correlations raise the possibility that the maps are more than documents. They are repositories of collective memory, hints of a global understanding deliberately kept from public knowledge. Some maps contain symbolic elements that are difficult to interpret. Islands are sometimes marked with glyphs, rivers annotated with numerical sequences, and coastlines drawn in conjunction with mystical symbols. These features suggest that the maps served multiple functions: practical, ritualistic, and mnemonic. They may have guided travelers, recorded historical cataclysms, and encoded philosophical or spiritual teachings simultaneously. The integration of esoteric symbols with geographic information implies a worldview in which the physical and metaphysical were inseparable, a perspective echoed in other Vatican manuscripts that blend astronomy, magic, and philosophy. Attempts to correlate the Vatican maps with known archaeological evidence have yielded intriguing, yet inconclusive results. Some coastlines match submerged land revealed through underwater surveys, while certain islands correspond with sites later found to contain traces of early human settlement. Scholars note that while the maps cannot be considered definitive evidence of pre-flood civilizations, the patterns they suggest cannot be dismissed as mere coincidence. Their precision and complexity hint at sources of knowledge far older than conventional European cartography, possibly preserved from cultures whose achievements were systematically lost or obscured. The secrecy surrounding the Vatican map manuscripts adds to their mystique. Access has historically been limited to a select few scholars, with entire sections of the collection remaining unseen by the wider academic community. Such restriction raises questions. Were these maps curated solely for scholarly study, or were they deliberately withheld to prevent disruption of accepted historical narratives? The very act of preservation within the Vatican implies recognition of their importance. Knowledge that could challenge assumptions about the extent of ancient exploration, the sophistication of lost civilizations, and humanity's understanding of its own past. Ultimately, the Vatican map manuscripts confront us with profound questions about memory, history, and erasure. They suggest that humanity's comprehension of the world has always been provisional, shaped by survival, catastrophe, and the selective preservation of knowledge. Each line, coastline, and annotation is a fragment of a larger story, one that may include journeys across oceans now forgotten, civilizations submerged by floods, and insights into the heavens intertwined with the earth itself. By studying these maps, we are invited to consider a past that is both tangible and elusive, to acknowledge civilizations and knowledge systems erased from conventional memory, and to reflect on the ways in which history itself is curated, shaped, and sometimes concealed. In the quiet chambers of the Vatican, these maps rest under layers of protection and secrecy, their secrets preserved in ink and parchment. They offer a glimpse into a world lost to time, suggesting a continuity of human knowledge that predates classical history and a depth of understanding that challenges modern assumptions about exploration, geography, and the memory of civilizations swallowed by cataclysm, codified, enigmatic, and precise. The Vatican map manuscripts endure as silent witnesses to forgotten voyages, submerged lands, and the deliberate preservation of a hidden human past, an invitation to journey across landscapes that exist only in memory and in these extraordinary, forbidden pages. Chapter 20. The Vatican astrological codices. In the hushed recesses of the Vatican archives, there lies a collection of manuscripts whose pages shimmer with the faint aura of both science and mysticism. These are the astrological codices, texts that meticulously track the movements of the heavens, noting planetary positions, lunar cycles, and eclipses with a precision that seems almost otherworldly. The codices are written in careful Latin, Greek, and occasionally in scripts that resist immediate identification, their letters flowing in elegant, sometimes cryptic forms. Yet beyond their linguistic complexity lies a deeper mystery. The calculations, the alignments, and the charts they preserve suggest knowledge that predates even Ptolemaic astronomy, hinting at an intellectual inheritance that stretches back into the shadowed corridors of Mesopotamian and Egyptian observation. Each codex is a repository of celestial memory, a record of time measured not only by the movement of the sun or moon, but by the intricate interplay of planets and stars. Scholars have noted the extraordinary accuracy of certain tables, allowing modern astronomers to trace retrograde motions, conjunctions, and eclipses centuries before they were supposedly first calculated. Within these pages are cycles of Saturn and Jupiter, Venus and Mars, marked with symbols that reveal an understanding of synodic periods far beyond what conventional histories of astronomy acknowledge. Some of these charts appear to encode patterns of eclipses across decades and even centuries, aligning celestial events with historical or mythological markers, a practice that suggests that codices were as much instruments of divination as they were tools for scientific observation. The origins of these codices are complex and layered. Certain manuscripts carry notes in cuneiform-derived numerals, hints of Egyptian fractions, or even archaic Mesopotamian calendrical conventions. Such interweaving of traditions implies a continuity of knowledge, preserved and transmitted across civilizations, refined and occasionally obscured as it passed from hand to hand. The Vatican's role in this preservation seems deliberate. Marginal annotations, sometimes erased and rewritten, suggest a careful custodianship, as if the codices were considered too potent or too sacred to be freely disseminated. Were these calculations used merely for liturgical timing and ecclesiastical purposes, or did they serve a more arcane function, recording cosmic events tied to cataclysms, floods, or the rise and fall of civilizations? Indeed, the precision of these codices invites speculation about their applications. Some alignments correspond to eclipses that ancient observers could have witnessed, while others predict phenomena centuries into the future. This duality of recording and forecasting indicates a purpose beyond mere academic interest. Certain charts are marked with symbols suggesting ritual significance, planetary conjunctions paired with sacred days, eclipses linked to festivals, and lunar phases annotated with warnings or blessings. It is as though the codices encoded a worldview in which human fate and celestial mechanics were inseparable, a perspective in which the cycles of planets were mirrored in the cycles of history. The codices also contain unusual diagrams, concentric circles, interlocking triangles, and spirals overlaid with planetary symbols, often resembling devices designed to model the heavens. Some scholars speculate that these diagrams are more than illustrations. They may be functional instruments, proto-astrolabes, or analog computers capable of modeling complex orbital relationships. The careful interplay of geometry and astronomy in these codices hints at a sophistication that predates known European innovation, suggesting a scientific heritage transmitted, perhaps secretly, from earlier cultures whose discoveries were later lost or suppressed. Equally intriguing are the notations that appear to mark anomalies or disruptions, sudden deviations in planetary motion, eclipses occurring off schedule, or repeated patterns that do not conform to linear calculations. These irregularities have prompted speculation that the codices may record events of cosmic significance, perhaps pre-flood celestial phenomena, that left an imprint on the collective memory of ancient civilizations. Could these codices have preserved warnings, embedded in numbers and alignments, of cataclysms remembered across centuries? The careful preservation and the layering of notes indicate that such knowledge was considered delicate, perhaps even dangerous. If misinterpreted or revealed to those uninitiated in the codice's deeper meaning. The Vatican's stewardship of these texts is as much a statement of reverence as it is of control. Access has historically been limited to scholars with proven expertise in both astronomy and ancient languages, and many codices remain untouched, their fragile pages hidden beneath protective coverings. This careful guardianship raises questions. Were these codices revered purely for their intellectual merit, or were they preserved because their insights were considered potent, capable of guiding rulers, influencing decisions, or shaping understanding of natural and historical cycles in ways the wider public was not ready to comprehend? Cross-referencing these manuscripts with historical records reveals further enigmas. Some planetary alignments correspond to eclipses and conjunctions mentioned in ancient texts from Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Greece, suggesting that the Vatican codices are part of a longer tradition of celestial observation. Yet in other instances, the codices diverge from known events, presenting alignments that are impossible under modern calculations unless one considers adjustments for lost knowledge, precession, or unknown astronomical phenomena. These discrepancies have led to speculation that the codices preserve not only observation, but encoded insight, a mapping of cosmic order, both visible and hidden, a symbolic and practical framework intertwining time, ritual, and the record of events long erased from conventional history. The interplay of astronomy and spirituality within these codices is particularly striking. Certain planets are annotated with moral or cosmological significance, linking celestial positions to human virtue, governance, or calamity. Jupiter, for example, is occasionally paired with rulership, Saturn with decline, and Venus with fertility or omen. The precise calculation of cycles appears inseparable from symbolic interpretation, reinforcing a worldview in which mathematics, observation, and philosophy were fused into a single framework of understanding. It is a vision of knowledge that encompasses the cosmos and the human experience within it. A reminder that, for ancient scholars, the heavens were not distant abstractions but active participants in the story of civilization. In contemplating these codices, one is struck by the layering of purpose, practical calculations, symbolic coding, historical record, and perhaps even prophetic insight. Each page is a palimpsest, a document written and rewritten, preserving centuries of observation, while concealing truths too powerful or dangerous to reveal outright. The careful crafting of these manuscripts, their meticulous annotation, and the deliberate secrecy surrounding them all speak to a recognition that celestial knowledge is not merely academic. It is entwined with the fabric of human history itself. Ultimately, the Vatican astrological codices invite us to imagine a world in which the movements of stars and planets were not abstract phenomena, but living guides, recorded meticulously and interpreted with reverence. They challenge modern assumptions about the origins of astronomy, suggesting that our understanding of the heavens is built atop layers of knowledge far older than widely acknowledged. Within their lines, charts, and diagrams lies a fusion of observation, philosophy, and coded memory, a silent testament to a tradition that saw the cosmos and humanity as inseparable, and that sought to preserve this vision even through centuries of secrecy. In the quiet chambers where these codices rest, under the careful watch of guardians who understand their fragility and significance, the stars continue to speak, their movements traced in ink on parchment. These codices endure as both scientific marvel and mystical record, inviting reflection on knowledge lost and preserved, on civilizations remembered and forgotten, and on the intimate connection between human fate and the celestial order above. They are, in every sense, maps of a cosmos that extends beyond measurement, beyond history, and into the uncharted territory of memory itself. Chapter 21. Vatican Codices on Alchemy within the labyrinthine corridors of the Vatican archives. Among the countless manuscripts of theology, astronomy, and philosophy, there exists a collection whose purpose has long been shrouded in secrecy: the Vatican Codices on Alchemy. These texts are unlike simple recipes or mystical musings. They are elaborate, multi-layered treatises that blend chemistry, cosmology, and spirituality into a singular framework. Each codex is adorned with complex diagrams, geometric patterns, and notations that suggest not merely theoretical reflection, but precise, practical experimentation. Here, the alchemical arts are presented as an integrated system of knowledge, an ancient technology that reaches far beyond the bounds of modern historical understanding. The codices describe processes that intertwine the transformation of metals with the harmonization of cosmic forces. Symbols representing mercury, sulfur, and salt, long associated with material transmutation, are meticulously aligned with planetary and stellar positions, suggesting that the practitioner was expected to observe celestial timing as part of the work. Gold, silver, and lesser metals are not merely commodities in these texts. They are substances through which the natural and spiritual worlds intersect, vehicles for energy, longevity, and perhaps even the manipulation of elemental forces. The pages contain sequences that, on first glance, appear symbolic: color transitions, phases of dissolution and coagulation, intricate diagrams resembling mechanical schematics. But repeated study reveals an extraordinary precision that implies functional methodology. Some manuscripts venture into the domain of life itself. There are recipes and notations that hint at longevity formulas, preservation of the human body, and the extraction of vital essences. The language is coded, oscillating between allegory and instruction. Yet the level of detail suggests more than metaphor. Vials, crucibles, furnaces, and specific temperatures are recorded alongside planetary positions, indicating that alchemical work was conducted according to a sophisticated synthesis of natural law and cosmic principle. Observing the heavens was not simply contemplative, it was operational. Mercury was not only a metal but a conduit. Sulfur was not only a combustive agent but a carrier of transformation. In this integration, the alchemical process mirrors the cosmos itself, a reflection of macrocosm and microcosm entwined. Beyond the focus on metals and human longevity, the codices describe the manipulation of elemental forces. Fire, water, air, and earth are treated not merely as classical elements, but as components of a system through which natural phenomena could be directed. Illustrations show vessels, columns, and channels, often aligned in specific geometric arrangements, hinting at a technology of flow, pressure, and transformation. Some scholars have argued that these diagrams encode processes akin to hydraulic or pneumatic mechanisms, systems in which chemistry and physics are intertwined. The precision of these illustrations challenges the conventional view that alchemy was solely a mystical or symbolic pursuit. Instead, they suggest a deliberate and sophisticated experimentation, a technological tradition deliberately obscured through centuries of secrecy. The Vatican's custodianship of these codices is itself suggestive. Access has historically been highly restricted, with only a select few scholars granted permission to study the manuscripts. Marginalia, sometimes erased and overwritten, indicate an ongoing concern with controlling the dissemination of knowledge. Certain passages are deliberately ambiguous, balancing practical instruction with symbolic language, as if the texts themselves are designed to safeguard their secrets. Was this protective obscurity motivated purely by spiritual concerns? Or did church authorities recognize that alchemical knowledge might confer practical power, capable of altering not only materials but social and political structures? Historians and chemists alike have been drawn to the precision embedded in these texts. Alchemical reactions are annotated with the minutiae of timing, sequence, and combination, sometimes including observations that align with modern chemical principles. While many codices remain undeciphered, the surviving sections suggest that ancient practitioners possessed an empirical understanding of reactions, distillation, and even catalysis couched within symbolic and mystical frameworks. This duality, practical efficacy concealed within allegory, reinforces the notion that alchemy in the Vatican was regarded as both a spiritual path and a technological discipline, a system designed to harmonize human endeavor with universal law. Cosmology permeates the codices in ways that go beyond the placement of planets or celestial timing. Certain texts describe the transformation of substances as a mirror of universal processes, growth, decay, and renewal reflected in metals, minerals, and human life. Color transitions, black, white, yellow, red, represent both chemical states and stages of spiritual evolution. The practitioner's work was simultaneously a laboratory experiment and a rite, each operation intended to align the microcosm of the laboratory with the macrocosm of the heavens. In this sense, alchemy was a philosophy of interconnection, an articulation of the hidden order of the universe expressed through material practice. Intriguingly, some codices contain detailed instructions that resemble proto-engineering diagrams, columns, furnaces, tubes, and containers arranged in precise geometries. These arrangements are overlaid with planetary and elemental correspondences, implying that the manipulation of matter could be synchronized with cosmic forces. Such illustrations have led scholars to speculate that the Vatican's alchemical texts may preserve a lost technological system, one in which the boundaries between chemistry, mechanics, and ritual were indistinct. The repeated revisions and careful preservation of these manuscripts suggest that this knowledge was considered powerful and potentially dangerous, enough to merit deliberate concealment from the broader public. The question of purpose lingers over every page. Were these texts primarily philosophical, intended as guides to inner transformation, or were they manuals of applied science, capable of producing tangible results in the material world? Perhaps the truth lies in their deliberate ambiguity, a design that ensured knowledge could be interpreted safely in one context and applied effectively in another. The Vatican codices, in their careful synthesis of chemistry, cosmology, and spirituality, suggest a worldview in which human mastery over nature was possible, but only through alignment with universal principles. Knowledge was both a key and a responsibility. Power, when separated from wisdom, could be disastrous. As one turns the pages, the meticulous craftsmanship is apparent. The parchment, ink, and pigments have endured centuries, and in some cases, the diagrams remain remarkably precise, as though encoded with a geometry meant to be read by those attuned to both material and symbolic language. Observing these codices, it becomes evident that the manuscripts were not merely preserved. They were curated, refined, and, in some cases, rewritten to maintain a balance between concealment and revelation. Each revision, each marginal note, speaks to a continuity of concern. The preservation of knowledge that bridges the natural and the mystical, the tangible and the cosmic. Ultimately, the Vatican codices on alchemy serve as a testament to the convergence of human ingenuity and spiritual inquiry. They suggest a tradition in which the pursuit of transformation, of metals, of life, of the very fabric of existence, was inseparable from observation, calculation, and reverence for the cosmos. These texts do not merely recount experiments. They map a philosophy, a technology, and a cosmology that together challenge the boundaries of conventional historical understanding. In their secrecy, their precision, and their enduring complexity, they invite reflection on knowledge lost and preserved, on the interface of science and mysticism, and on the civilizations that cultivated these insights long before they became accessible or acceptable to the wider world. Here, in the dim corridors of the Vatican, the codices rest, silent yet potent. Their diagrams, formulas, and symbols continue to hold the imprint of human curiosity and cosmic aspiration. They are repositories of a vision in which matter and spirit are inseparable, where the manipulation of elements mirrors the order of the universe itself, and where the secrets of transformation await those who can discern the patterns woven through centuries of deliberate preservation. Chapter 22, Codex Vaticanus 5000, Early Languages. Deep within the quiet, labyrinthine vaults of the Vatican, there rests a manuscript whose very existence challenges the conventional boundaries of history, Codex Vaticanus 5000. Its pages are fragile, their edges darkened by centuries, yet the inscriptions within defy easy categorization. The text presents a tapestry of signs, symbols, and pictographs, some of which bear tantalizing resemblance to Proto-Sumerian cuneiform, Harappan seals, or the elusive markings of the Etruscan language. Yet none align perfectly with any known system. Each character seems to exist simultaneously as a fragment of the familiar and an echo of a forgotten tongue. Here lies a linguistic puzzle that whispers of eras before recorded history, and possibly before the deluge of collective memory that modern scholars call the pre-flood world. The manuscript's pages are layered with careful annotations, overstrikes, and marginalia, evidence of repeated study over generations. Some symbols are isolated, while others form sequences whose meaning remains opaque. When scholars attempt to interpret these sequences, they confront an uncertainty that is almost philosophical in nature. Is this an alphabet, a syllabary, or a system of conceptual notation meant to transmit thought rather than sound? The very structure of the text suggests a sophistication that implies intention. It is not a chaotic collection of marks, but a deliberate arrangement, a coded record whose purpose might have been as much to preserve the memory of language itself as to communicate with another. Certain pages display groups of symbols juxtaposed with geometric shapes and diagrams. Circles, triangles, and spirals accompany markings that appear almost like a proto-mathematical system. Scholars have proposed that these combinations may encode ritual knowledge, astronomical data, or formulas linking speech to the natural world. In this light, language becomes not only a tool for communication, but a vehicle for understanding cosmic patterns, a reflection of a worldview in which the act of inscription itself participates in the ordering of reality. The Codex seems to suggest that early civilizations may have possessed a linguistic and symbolic fluency lost to the centuries, a knowledge preserved in fragments and carefully safeguarded. When compared to known ancient scripts, certain parallels emerge yet remain tantalizingly incomplete. A linear sequence might echo the forms of early Harappan inscriptions, yet it does not conform to the phonetic or structural conventions recognized by epigraphers. Another cluster evokes cuneiform wedges, but the arrangement of lines defies grammatical patterns established in Mesopotamia. Etruscan parallels appear in isolated glyphs, hinting at a continuity or diffusion of symbolic tradition across the Mediterranean. It is as though the manuscript preserves a network of linguistic thought that predated and perhaps informed the earliest civilizations known to history. The possibility arises that these scripts were once part of a universal, or at least widely disseminated system of communication, now fragmented by the cataclysms of time. One of the most striking features of Codex Vaticanus 5000 is its integration of visual context. Symbols are not confined to linear text. They appear alongside pictorial representations of architecture, celestial bodies, and ritual objects. In some instances, glyphs are inscribed within concentric circles, overlaid on diagrams of stars or rivers, suggesting a correspondence between written language and the environment, both terrestrial and celestial. This practice implies that writing itself was considered a mirror of the universe, a medium capable of encoding not merely words but knowledge of cycles, forces, and relationships that extend beyond human perception. The Codex may therefore contain more than linguistic data. It is potentially a repository of symbolic cosmology. The repeated erasures, overwrites, and layered inscriptions within the manuscript suggest a deliberate attempt to conceal or protect the knowledge it contains. In some sections, earlier symbols are partially visible beneath later strokes, their faint presence hinting at revisions or redactions over centuries. This palimpsestic nature raises profound questions. Were these linguistic forms deliberately preserved as relics of an antediluvian past? Were they encoded to protect knowledge that, if understood, might alter the perception of history or the origins of human civilization? The Vatican's careful custody of the Codex, along with similar early language manuscripts, implies a recognition of both the importance and the potential danger of such material. Attempts to decode the manuscript have produced only fragmentary insights. Computational analyses and comparative studies reveal patterns, frequency clusters, and recurring sequences, yet the meaning remains elusive. Some researchers posit that these symbols functioned as a mnemonic system, designed to transmit complex ideas across generations without relying on phonetic articulation. Others suggest that the Codex preserves ritualized speech, an ancient lexicon intended to interface with natural or spiritual forces. In either case, the text challenges the assumption that literacy, language, and culture developed linearly. It hints at the possibility of sophisticated communication systems existing long before the earliest known alphabets. The potential scope of Codex Vaticanus 5000 is staggering. If indeed it encodes fragments of pre-flood communication, then it offers a bridge to civilizations erased from the historical record. Its symbols might have once conveyed practical knowledge, philosophical concepts, or cosmological principles, now surviving only as tantalizing echoes. Cross-references with other Vatican manuscripts suggest connections to alchemical treatises, cosmological diagrams, and ritual instructions, indicating that language, science, and spirituality may have been inseparable in these early systems. In this light, the Codex becomes not merely a linguistic curiosity, but a key to understanding the intellectual infrastructure of lost civilizations. The physicality of the manuscript contributes to its aura of mystery. The vellum is unusually thin yet remarkably resilient. The ink, when analysed, contains traces of compounds indicating intentional chemical preparation, perhaps to preserve the legibility of symbols over millennia. Marginal notations in later hands hint at centuries of study and annotation, revealing a tradition of scholarship that spans cultures and generations. The codex is at once fragile and formidable, a testament to human effort invested in preserving knowledge whose significance transcends mere words. Ultimately, Codex Vaticanus, 5,000 Forces, reflection on the nature of human memory, cultural continuity, and the fragility of knowledge. Its symbols suggest that the origins of written communication may be far older, far more intricate, and far more widespread than the historical record allows. It intimates a civilization, or a network of civilizations, capable of encoding ideas with such sophistication that the echoes of their communication survive in forms we can scarcely understand. The Vatican's custodianship, the layered preservation, and the careful control of access underscore the Codex's importance, and perhaps its peril. Here lies knowledge that could alter accepted timelines of human development, yet remains shrouded in enigmatic silence. As one contemplates the manuscript, the mind is drawn to a horizon of possibility that human communication, in its earliest forms, was simultaneously practical, spiritual, and cosmic, that the Codex preserves a linguistic fingerprint of a world before history as we know it, and that beneath the indecipherable symbols lies the faint pulse of memory, an echo of civilizations whose voices were nearly extinguished, now murmuring faintly through the veiled corridors of the Vatican archives. Chapter 23. Vatican Manuscripts on Solar Cataclysms within the silent, dimly lit vaults of the Vatican, among shelves stacked with manuscripts whose spines have been worn thin by centuries of reverent handling. There exist codices that defy conventional categorization, texts that speak of the sun not merely as a celestial body, but as a force capable of upheaval, transformation, and devastation. These manuscripts record events of extraordinary magnitude, violent flares, unusual coronal ejections, sudden shifts in solar brightness that seem almost mythic in scale. Yet when read carefully, alongside subtle notations and diagrams, they reveal a remarkable attention to observational detail, as though the scribes sought to document phenomena that could reshape life on Earth. The codices often describe the sun as a restless entity, its movement through the heavens intertwined with earthly consequences. Some passages recount skies streaked with unusual light, days of darkness, and rivers swelling beyond their banks. Others hint at the gradual retreat of ice, sudden droughts, and inexplicable storms. At first glance, these accounts could be interpreted as allegorical or religious in tone, yet the precision of some numerical annotations and temporal markers suggests a systematic approach to recording phenomena. In a sense, these manuscripts are at once scientific and symbolic, blending observation with the language of ritual, as though to communicate not only events themselves, but their significance within a cosmic order. Strikingly, cross-referencing these texts with geological and climatological evidence reveals uncanny correspondences. Layers of sediment, isotopic anomalies, and fossilized flora indicate periods of sudden warming and flooding, moments in the geological record where life was abruptly stressed or displaced. In some instances, the timing of these events aligns closely with dates implied in the manuscript's sequences. While mainstream science treats these as coincidental, the Vatican codices suggest an awareness of cyclical solar disruption, a knowledge preserved and coded over generations, perhaps originating from observations lost to civilizations predating recorded history. The codices also convey a sense of reverence and caution. Marginalia reveal repeated warnings, phrased in symbolic language, hinting at the destabilizing potential of such knowledge. Some diagrams depict the sun as a series of concentric or spiraling forms, with annotations indicating intervals, angles, and periods of apparent restlessness. These are not simple sketches. They are deliberate, precise, and repeated across multiple pages, suggesting that the scribes understood the significance of what they recorded. Knowledge of solar cataclysms was not to be dismissed lightly. It was powerful, dangerous, and perhaps capable of altering both society and belief. In some manuscripts, the solar events are linked to terrestrial cycles, the rise and fall of rivers, the eruption of volcanoes, and the collapse of settlements. These correlations suggest an understanding that cosmic forces and earthly phenomena were interconnected. One cannot help but sense that the scribes perceived their world as a fragile balance, in which the sun's temper could tip the scales of human existence. The manuscripts do not merely catalogue catastrophe, they encode an awareness of vulnerability, a recognition that life on Earth is inextricably tied to celestial rhythms beyond human control. Interestingly, certain codices integrate mathematical sequences and calendrical systems alongside the textual descriptions. Some pages contain tables that appear to calculate intervals between events. Others suggest predictive cycles, though the exact methodology remains opaque. Scholars have debated whether these represent early attempts at astronomical modeling, or if they are ritualized encodings meant to preserve knowledge across generations without revealing its full import. In either case, the presence of structured computation alongside narrative description hints at an intellectual tradition that combined empirical observation with symbolic memory, a synthesis of science, history, and spirituality rarely acknowledged in conventional histories of astronomy. The careful preservation of these manuscripts implies both reverence and caution. Pages are often thickly bound, coated with protective layers, and stored in conditions designed to resist the ravages of time. The Vatican's meticulous curation suggests an awareness of the manuscript's potential impact. Knowledge of solar cataclysms could destabilize accepted narratives of human history, challenge religious orthodoxy, and reveal the fragility of civilizations. The scribes, and the generations that followed, appear to have recognized that the power of the sun, recorded with such precision, was not merely scientific, but profoundly existential. Some of the more cryptic passages describe phenomena that modern astrophysics has only begun to conceptualize. References to sudden, intense bursts of energy, rapid shifts in solar magnetism, and cascading atmospheric effects echo the understanding of coronal mass ejections and solar storms that contemporary science now confirms can affect Earth on a global scale. Whether these codices preserved first-hand observations, ancient legend, or a combination of both, their content resonates with an eerie prescience. It is as if the scribes were recording not stories, but memory of events so distant, so catastrophic, that their true scale was almost unimaginable. The manuscript's narratives also intersect with theological and philosophical concerns. Solar cataclysms are sometimes portrayed as expressions of divine will, as trials or purifications imposed upon humanity. Yet, in parallel, they are documented with meticulous attention to timing, magnitude, and consequence, implying that the phenomenon itself, not merely its moral interpretation, was worthy of study. This dual approach, both reverent and analytical, suggests a worldview in which the divine and natural are inseparable, each informing the other, and each requiring careful contemplation to preserve both knowledge and spiritual equilibrium. In reading these codices, one cannot help but sense the tension between revelation and concealment. The texts are detailed enough to convey extraordinary insight, yet obfuscated enough to resist facile interpretation. Diagrams are drawn with precision, yet overlaid with cryptic symbols. Dates are recorded, yet veiled behind marginal codes. It is as if the scribes intended to preserve understanding while shielding it from casual observation, aware that knowledge of solar cataclysms, if misused or misunderstood, could provoke fear, disorder, or even upheaval in established institutions. Ultimately, the Vatican manuscripts on solar cataclysms offer a window into a worldview both ancient and remarkably sophisticated. They suggest that civilizations before recorded history observed the heavens with an attentiveness that rivals modern astronomy, that they perceived the sun not merely as light or warmth, but as a force capable of transformation, destruction, and renewal. The texts preserve both memory and warning, a bridge between observation and prophecy, science and ritual, human experience and cosmic scale. In contemplating these codices, one is drawn to the delicate balance between knowledge and concealment, between memory and forgetfulness. The sun, in all its brilliance and volatility, becomes a symbol of the hidden forces that have shaped human history and of the careful stewardship required to understand them. The manuscripts remain silent in their mystery, yet they speak volumes through their preservation, a testament to human curiosity, vigilance, and the enduring effort to preserve the record of forces far beyond mortal comprehension. Chapter 24. The Vatican's Forgotten Library. In the quietest recesses of the Vatican, beyond the echoing halls of public visitation and the illuminated chambers of familiar texts, exists a collection so vast, so intricately layered, that it defies comprehension. Scholars speak in whispers of its breadth, historians in cautious speculation, yet no account can truly convey the magnitude of what lies within. This is not merely a library, it is a repository of memory, a silent archive of human curiosity, ingenuity, and the remnants of civilizations that predate even the earliest recorded histories. Its corridors are lined with manuscripts, scrolls, codices, and palimpsests whose ages span centuries, millennia even, yet whose preservation is uncanny. Some are written on materials no longer in common use, inks that resist time, pigments that retain their vibrancy as though infused with secrets too potent to fade. Here, chronology dissolves. A single shelf may contain a text describing mechanical devices centuries ahead of recognized invention, a treatise on astronomy that records celestial cycles lost to modern history, and a codex of botanical illustrations that defy contemporary classification. The manuscripts speak not in linear history, but in layered memory, sometimes fragmentary, sometimes startlingly precise, offering glimpses into a world both familiar and utterly alien. In these documents, civilizations rise and fall in patterns that echo one another across time and space, their knowledge encoded in ways that suggest deliberate preservation against the erasure imposed by cataclysm, conquest, or human forgetfulness. One might walk these aisles and sense an intentional curation, as if the guardians of this knowledge understood that some truths could destabilize the very narratives upon which societies are founded. Inscriptions hint at pre-flood civilizations whose technologies and cosmologies surpass the capacities historically attributed to humankind. Maps chart continents now submerged, coastlines vanished beneath oceans, cities whose foundations have long since crumbled, yet which remain immortal in ink and vellum. Astronomical tables record eclipses and planetary alignments unknown until centuries later, while diagrams of automata and hydraulic mechanisms suggest engineering prowess that modern science cannot fully replicate. Here, the boundary between legend and observation blurs, and one begins to wonder whether history itself has been shaped by the selective survival of knowledge. Palimpsests reveal another layer of this deliberate concealment. Beneath the visible text, faint traces of older writings emerge when illuminated by spectral imaging, texts that were erased or overwritten, yet never entirely destroyed. Some contain lost languages, mathematical formulas, or ritual instructions that hint at a continuity of thought predating recognized history. Each layer of writing speaks of both preservation and suppression, an awareness that the knowledge within could empower, enlighten, or destabilize, depending on the beholder's intent. Scholars who have accessed these fragments speak of the profound difficulty in discerning intent, as every manuscript seems to oscillate between revelation and concealment, offering only hints of the fullness it once contained. The variety of subjects within the library is staggering. One corridor may house treatises on alchemy and metallurgy, detailing substances and processes whose applications remain partially understood. Another holds codices of cosmology, connecting celestial events to terrestrial cycles in ways that imply both observation and symbolic encoding. Medical manuscripts describe plants, minerals, and compounds with precision, some of which modern pharmacology has yet to verify, suggesting a sophisticated understanding of the natural world, intertwined with ritual and spiritual frameworks. There are accounts of solar cataclysms, floods, and cataclysmic climate shifts whose records, when cross-referenced with geological and archaeological evidence, seem to correspond with periods of profound disruption in human and environmental history. Yet for all this knowledge, the library resists comprehension. Its guardians, whether by design or circumstance, have ensured that fragments can be glimpsed, but the entirety remains inaccessible. Scholars may trace references from one codex to another, detect recurring symbols, or decipher partial tables, but the overarching structure, the way these diverse pieces of knowledge interlock, remains a mystery. It is a library that does not merely store information, it orchestrates memory, protecting the echoes of human achievement and disaster alike, and ensuring that only those prepared, or perhaps destined, can glimpse the full pattern. There is also a philosophical dimension to the library's preservation. Many manuscripts indicate a worldview in which human knowledge is cyclical, subject to periods of flourishing and obliteration. Lost civilizations are not anomalies but participants in a grander rhythm, whose wisdom is encoded not to be immediately understood but to endure. Numerical sequences, geometric diagrams, and astrological calculations recur throughout the collection, suggesting a belief that cosmic order and human history are intertwined, that understanding the cycles of the heavens offers insight into the cycles of societies. Knowledge in this conception is not static. It is alive, mutable, and capable of outlasting empires and epochs, provided it is carefully curated. The Vatican's role, then, becomes more than custodial. It is protective, almost sacred. Within these walls, knowledge is not a commodity or a resource to be exploited. It is a vessel for continuity. The decision to shield these manuscripts from public view may have been motivated by doctrinal concerns, political control, or the simple recognition that humanity is not always ready to confront the implications of its own past. To open these shelves indiscriminately would be to unleash understanding without context, to present memory without the interpretive framework necessary to preserve its integrity. In this light, secrecy is itself an act of stewardship, a measure to safeguard both knowledge and those who might encounter it. Walking through the imagined aisles of this forgotten library, one perceives a tension between what is revealed and what remains hidden. Manuscripts hint at technologies and philosophies that could alter modern paradigms, at histories that question accepted chronologies, at cosmologies that suggest connections across continents and epochs now lost to time. Some texts suggest pre-flood civilizations. Others describe celestial phenomena that challenge conventional astronomy. And still others encode symbolic knowledge whose meaning may never be fully recovered. Each piece is a fragment of a mosaic whose edges extend beyond the human capacity to comprehend, yet whose patterns are faintly discernible if approached with patience, reverence, and imagination. Ultimately, the Vatican's forgotten library is a mirror of humanity itself, its curiosity, its ingenuity, its capacity for destruction and preservation. It embodies the persistence of knowledge in the face of disaster, the careful curation of memory across centuries, and the enduring recognition that some truths are both illuminating and dangerous. Within its vaults lie the echoes of civilizations long vanished, the shadows of discoveries yet to be rediscovered, and the silent testimony that history is neither linear nor complete, but layered, fragile, and deeply contingent. As one contemplates this archive, it becomes clear that the full scope of its contents may never be known. Scholars will continue to trace fragments, decipher symbols, and speculate on the interconnections between texts. But the library's totality is perhaps intentionally beyond reach. A monument not to human comprehension, but to human endurance. In this sense, the Vatican is more than a repository. It is a guardian of mysteries that transcend time, a testament to the enduring interplay between knowledge, memory, and the cycles of civilizations that rise, fall, and are remembered only in fragments. The silent shelves, the careful codices, and the guarded vaults speak to a truth both profound and unsettling, that human history, as we understand it, is only a shadow of the knowledge once possessed, and perhaps still preserved in places few will ever see. The deeper one imagines moving through the Vatican's hidden chambers, the more the collection begins to feel alive, as though each manuscript carries a whisper of the hand that created it, of the mind that reasoned, calculated, or envisioned what lay beyond ordinary perception. Some pages are so finely illuminated that their details suggest not only aesthetic mastery, but encoded instruction. A diagram of concentric circles may map the heavens, outline ritual sequences, or encode numeric knowledge simultaneously. Botanical illustrations, strange and unfamiliar, evoke plants that resist classification, yet their meticulous depiction hints at observation, experimentation, and perhaps applications now lost to the ages. The library is not merely a collection of texts, it is a living archive of human thought, a repository of inquiry across disciplines that modern scholarship often artificially separates. Science and mysticism, observation and ritual, engineering and cosmology, history and prophecy. Many codices contain marginalia, notations, cryptic symbols, and corrections that suggest iterative engagement, as if generations of scholars, scribes, and adepts return to the same work, contributing layers of commentary and insight. Some annotations hint at coded language, possibly to obscure knowledge from casual readers, or to preserve delicate truths for those deemed initiated. In several cases, the original script lies beneath subsequent layers of writing, intentionally overwritten, a palimpsest of human knowledge both erased and preserved. These layers, each inscribed with care, suggest a recognition that information is powerful, capable of shaping belief, guiding decisions, and even influencing the fate of societies. Within these protective layers, one senses a deliberate orchestration to conceal, to reveal, and to preserve simultaneously. The manuscripts reveal a pattern: civilizations, catastrophes, celestial phenomena, and technological insights appear repeatedly across disparate texts, often centuries or millennia apart. References to lost cities, pre-flood knowledge, and astronomical events echo across languages and regions, suggesting that the Vatican may have compiled these codices not merely for preservation, but to retain a comparative archive, a record of humanity's collective memory, however fractured. These cross-references, subtle and often hidden in marginal notes, imply an awareness that history is both cyclical and fragile, that understanding patterns of rise and collapse could provide insight into the present and guidance for the future. The technological manuscripts are particularly striking. Detailed schematics of automata, hydraulic machines, and mechanical devices predate similar European examples by centuries, implying either extraordinary foresight, transmission from lost civilizations, or access to knowledge deliberately obscured in mainstream historical accounts. Elsewhere, medical texts preserve anatomical diagrams, descriptions of surgical procedures, and compound formulations that anticipate Renaissance discoveries by generations. Alchemical treatises, long dismissed as metaphorical, often reveal precise steps and chemical relationships that could be practically applied, hinting at a technological tradition hidden within a mystical veneer. In each case, the texts demand a reconsideration of what we understand about historical timelines, intellectual continuity, and the limits of human achievement. Equally compelling are the cosmological and prophetic manuscripts. Astronomical codices meticulously record eclipses, planetary alignments, and precession cycles with precision far beyond what historians once assumed possible in pre-modern societies. Flood legends, solar cataclysms, and climate anomalies recur across geographically and temporally distinct texts, suggesting that ancient observers, sometimes hidden from conventional historical memory, tracked natural phenomena and encoded these observations in narrative, numeric, or symbolic form. Were these accounts ritualized memory, early scientific observation, or both? The Vatican's preservation of such records implies recognition of their import, knowledge powerful enough to challenge chronology, theology, or societal assumptions. The philosophical dimension is pervasive. Many texts reveal a worldview in which knowledge is inherently cyclical, in which civilizations flourish and collapse within grand cosmic rhythms, and in which human understanding is both fragile and resilient. Geometry, numerology, astrology, and metaphysical speculation coexist with pragmatic observation, illustrating a continuity between empirical study and spiritual insight that modern scholarship rarely accommodates. Symbols recur across manuscripts, linking disparate disciplines and suggesting a deliberate effort to encode a multidimensional understanding of the cosmos. Knowledge not meant to be fully grasped at a glance, but to unfold over time, study, and contemplation. Even the physicality of the collection conveys meaning. Manuscripts vary in size, weight, and composition. Some are small, pocket-sized codices likely intended for travel or private study. Others are monumental, their pages broad and elaborately illuminated, intended to convey authority and permanence. Materials, parchment, papyrus, vellum, metals, and rare inks demonstrate an advanced understanding of preservation. The act of writing itself becomes performative, each stroke a meditation, each pigment choice a calculated attempt to endure across centuries. Within these choices lies a dual consciousness, one of practical concern for longevity, another of reverence for the knowledge itself. Yet despite this vast repository, the full scope remains elusive. Scholars who gain access describe glimpses, fragments, tantalizing patterns, but the entirety of the archive is deliberately shielded. Its complexity ensures that partial exposure cannot compromise the integrity of the knowledge, that selective preservation controls both interpretation and dissemination. This careful orchestration reinforces the notion that the Vatican's library is not simply historical, it is intentional. Its architecture, curation, and secrecy forming a lattice through which human understanding is mediated, preserved, and protected. To contemplate this collection is to confront the fragility and resilience of memory itself. History, often thought linear and absolute, is revealed here as contingent, layered, and fragile, shaped by choices as much as by events. Civilizations rise and fall, their knowledge sometimes destroyed, sometimes preserved, often hidden from view. The Vatican's forgotten library stands as testament to this tension, a guardian of what humanity has sought to forget, what has been lost, and what may never be recovered. Its manuscripts speak not in certainty, but in suggestion, not in finality, but in invitation, to study, to question, to imagine. In its totality, the library embodies a paradox: knowledge preserved through secrecy, memory sustained through obscurity. Its manuscripts challenge modern assumptions about the progression of civilizations, the limits of human ingenuity, and the reliability of historical record. They hint at civilizations whose sophistication surpasses their recognition in conventional history, at technologies developed and then lost, at cosmic observations that predate accepted chronologies. Within these texts resides a silent insistence that human history is far deeper, more intricate, and more enigmatic than our narratives allow. And that understanding is as much a matter of perception, patience, and insight as it is of mere discovery. Walking among the imagined shelves of this forgotten library, one might sense the weight of centuries pressing in, the voices of ancient scribes echoing faintly across time. Each codex is a vessel, a memory, a testament to the human desire to understand the world, even in the face of destruction, suppression, or oblivion. Some knowledge is revealed, other knowledge remains deliberately obscured, perhaps to protect, perhaps to preserve, perhaps to await a future capable of comprehension. In this way, the Vatican becomes more than a repository of texts. It is a guardian of civilization's hidden dimensions, a silent witness to the enduring human quest to record, understand, and transcend the limits of time.